Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's City Council meeting. If you listened to the work session, you know it went much longer than we had anticipated, so we apologize for the delay. We are going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I think Councilmember Fort, it was your turn to lead us. Next, we have the consent agenda. Nothing has been pulled. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous, clerk. Next, we have public comment. And first is 3 minutes, so if we could set the timer. First, we have Christina Jones.
8005 Finland Drive. I want to start out this afternoon on a positive note. Last time I came before you, I let you know that the Raleigh Citizens Advisory Council met with the city's budget department and discussed how we could improve on how many people filled out this year's budget survey. I am pleased to inform you that as of Monday, we are at 1,000 completed surveys out of our total of 2,000. That is a fantastic representation of a strong public-private partnership that includes residents' voices from all over the city. We will keep you updated as we move through the month. Next, I wanted to bring up once again the discussion of boards and commissions. I chair the Parks Committee for the Parks Board, and we met last week. I wanted to bring 2 issues to your attention. We began work on a Welcome to Raleigh series last fall and are coming along very well. We will be partnering with Raleigh Youth Council, BPAC, the Great Raleigh Cleanup, and many other groups throughout the summer and fall in an effort to introduce residents to our beautiful park system. We will help amplify one community center at each council district, starting next month with Abbott's Creek's annual Easter egg hunt in District B on April 7th. I'm bringing this up because as a board member, I know it is my job to help initiate programs like this. When I asked for help with communicating this event out to a larger group of people through the city's communication department, I was told we would be receiving no assistance. This is the same problem that RCAC ran into back in 2018. The city refused to support resident initiatives. Can you help me understand what my role is as a board member? Finally, in the Parks Committee, we have been talking about the upcoming fee increase in regards to Raleigh pools. We were supposed to open up the topic to the full board in January and then have multiple community conversations before it went to council. That process was moved back for review, and now there isn't enough time to hold multiple meetings for the public. Again, I ask, what is my role as a board member? I see my job as the conduit between residents and council, but if I'm not given the time or the resources necessary to do that job, how can I be successful? As we continue to grow, it is important that board members feel supported. It's even more important that board members interact with council. It should be a requirement for council liaisons to be present at board meetings so they can accurately report back on what the community is saying. Governing through conversation should be the gold standard. Boards and commissions are the strongest avenue for public participation. If you aren't going to nurture the system you already have, it's only a matter of time before you get rid of that too. Thank you.
Christina, did you receive orientation?
Yes, I did.
Okay, was your role explained to you at that point in time?
The roles of the department were explained. So we understood the Parks Director's role. I understood what each person that was helping assist us did, but I don't know what you want from me. Okay. Being appointed from you, I'm not sure what your expectations of what I do on the board are.
I'm going to ask Tansy Haywood, our Deputy City Manager, to engage with you in conversation about that and ensure that orientation moving forward, board members understand their role.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Sean Riggin. Is Sean here? Okay, Next, Joshua Janovec.
Thank you for your time. I'd like to share some thoughts on
Can
continuing
we have your name and address for the record, please?
My
I'm
name is
sorry.
Joshua Yanoviak. My address is 511 Royal Oak Drive, Garner. I'd like to share some thoughts on continuing to allow service industry employees free access to downtown parking decks. I'm an employee at Beasley's on Wilmington Street, and the city of Raleigh has up until now graciously allotted a number of parking passes for downtown decks to be distributed amongst employees of certain businesses. I've made my living working in restaurants in Raleigh for over a decade, and like many professionals in the industry, was forced into unemployment for nearly 2 years during the pandemic. I was lucky enough to be able to receive unemployment assistance for some of that time, but I know many fellow service industry employees who were not, and many who have made their careers in the industry who are now living paycheck to paycheck because of it. People are slowly returning to dining out, but not nearly at the rate that they were before the pandemic. My paychecks are a little over half of what they were in 2019. And due to inflation, unprecedented rent increases in this area, and the rising cost of fuel, the economic crush is crippling. So the prospect of paying $15 for parking during a work shift where I make a little over $100 has made me and many of my coworkers extremely worried. It seems especially cruel considering I have yet to even once see the deck we use half full during the 8 months I've been working at Beasley's. The reality, I think, is that most employees, instead of paying $15 to park, will spend a stressfully unpredictable amount of time before each shift looking for cheaper or free street parking, potentially many blocks away from work. These are spaces that businesses downtown would certainly rather have available for patrons. And all restaurants are struggling now and can't afford to give customers another reason not to patronize us. So the net result for the city will not be an increase in parking revenues if you get rid of this parking program, but merely a stressful inconvenience for a group of workers struggling to regain their financial footing. Thank you.
Joshua, thank you. We have 2 more people who will be speaking on the parking issue, so I'm going to go a little out of order and call them up so we can address this issue. Let's see. Wadis Lake. Okay, thank you. And then Alyssa Tenets.
My name is Alyssa Chnachi. Address is 2038 Carroll Drive. Thank you for taking the time to hear us today. When we first were able to take advantage of this temporary relief program, we realized what a difference it made for our team. And we've been able to utilize just 4 of these parking spaces to provide relief for my team at Beasley's. Right now, as Josh pointed out, the deck is only at 35% occupancy. So I would argue, why can't we revisit this when it's at 75%, 80%, maybe allow myself and our team to provide a more long-term solution so that we can really provide support to our hospitality workers. It's what makes downtown so special. I know at Beasley's we have folks who come with their suitcases straight for the airport, and that's what they're doing, is they're coming to eat, enjoy the food, and my team provides that to our guests for Raleigh, and I think part of what makes Raleigh special. So I'd really push to extend this for longer until maybe the deck reaches 75%, 80% occupancy, because more often than not it is empty. So thank you for hearing us today.
Okay, thank you. I think you know we started this program to specifically support our small business community downtown, and I believe that Councilor Melton would like to respond to this.
What was your name again? I'm sorry.
Alyssa, and I do know Brian had also signed up to speak, if it would be possible to let him get a few more words in.
Of course.
Yeah.
Brian?
Yep.
I don't see a Brian on here.
Could he take Wadis's spot in?
Well, if it's helpful, I was going to suggest
I
that we
think
do.
you're going to hear something you want to hear.
I was going to suggest that we do exactly what you proposed. So I've been talking with Mayor Pro Tem Stewart about this issue and some of the restaurant owners, as well as Bill King with Downtown Raleigh Alliance. And when we initially propped up this program, we had all these empty decks because the monthly pass holders were not back. and we saw it as a real opportunity to help with like the service industry and with, you know, the small business community. And we set, I guess, an arbitrary sort of sunset date on it, which was the end of March. And I think we did that probably back in July. And I think what we've seen is COVID has been unpredictable. And it seems, I think, odd to have an arbitrary sort of sunset provision when the reality of it is if the decks continue to stay mostly empty, then I don't see any reason why folks can't continue to use it under this program. So I would suggest that we monitor it, tie it to a metric, I think 75, 80% occupancy. The issue is going to be that when the pass holders come back, this cannot be a sustainable long-term program. But I love the idea of working with y'all on what could be a long-term program, because I know we have other programs right now, and it may be that the information's not out there, or maybe that those programs aren't structured in a way that's actually working. And so what I think we should do is continue this until we reach a certain metric at the deck, 70, 80%, and then also authorize staff to work with DRA and some of y'all to come up with, if that $20 pass we have isn't right, if the hours aren't right, if the amount's not right, let's figure out a more sustainable long-term model. So that's what I'd like to do.
Well, that's the $20 monthly pass that you're referencing.
Right, but if that needs to be tweaked, I liked the idea of let's work with them on what a long-term solution could look like.
Yeah, the $20 is often nights and weekends when more often than not our staff is already able to get out of the deck for free due to not having to pay after 10 o'clock. So it's really some of those daytime hours that are harder to cover. But I really appreciate you putting forward the thought to extend this and kind of monitor it as it continues, because COVID is unpredictable.
So what I would like to suggest, I mean, could you make a motion with staff direction and that we can vote on?
Well, I would move that we continue the temporary relief program and tie it to a metric, maybe when the decks are 75 to 80% filling back up. So have staff monitor that, and then also authorize staff to come back to work with the community on what a permanent program could look like. It sounds like the one we have now, the $20 one, doesn't really match the hours of the day, so I'm sure we could come up with something better. This particular program in itself is not sustainable in a long-term model, but I'm sure we can come up with something that would be. And in the meantime, I think we should continue this one until we hit a certain capacity at the deck. So that's my motion.
Do we have a second?
Well, I want to add.
Excuse me, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart has seconded. Councilmember
I would like to
Branch.
offer a friendly amendment to extend the current program and have staff come back with a recommendation on a percentage instead of us just picking a number from here.
Sure, that's fine. So keep the current program, tie it to a metric, and whatever.
I'm going to ask staff, could somebody respond and let us know how much time you would need to evaluate this so we can look at an extension timeframe? Hey, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Matt Currier, I'm the parking manager for the city. We could work with DRA and the business community maybe over the next 60 to 90 days, monitoring daily occupancies in the parking deck, and work towards what we think a appropriate percentage is. We can look back maybe at some 2018, 2019 data, pre-pandemic, to see where capacities were at that point, and maybe match it to that. But I think we would need a little bit of time to run those numbers. And
So extend till the end of June?
Yeah.
Makes sense? Okay.
With the goal at that point to come up with a metric of
And then staff will come back to us at that time with a report. Before
accept
that.
the friendly amendment.
Okay. Everybody, clerk, you have that?
I'll email it.
Okay. All right. Motion has been made by Councilor Melton, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming in today. Next, we have Javier Campos. Is Javier in today? Okay. And next, Tara Robbins.
Good afternoon, Council, Madam Manager, City Attorney. It certainly is nice to see you guys without having to look into a monitor first, so that's great. I wanted to just come here today and kind of bring you some news from Midtown. Tara Robbins, 920 Paverstone Drive, here representing the Midtown Raleigh Alliance. We are not an MSD, so we don't have to give regular updates as per statute, but I wanted to just come and let you know what's going on in Midtown. Things are great in Midtown, but also things are not great in Midtown. We have amazing projects underway that will transform landscapes and create new, exciting spaces that blur the lines between working and socializing and collaborating, and there's certainly much to be excited about. However, we are again before you asking to get our 10-year-old project underway. You were recently made aware by staff that due to several factors, the project budget for the Six Forks Corridor transportation improvements, like all other transportation projects, have been impacted by our current conditions and is significantly underfunded. In 2000, 22 years ago, there was a transportation bond that included funds to fix the Millbrook interchange, and that was 22 years ago. 12 years after that, MRA convened the larger community and staff for a visioning project that ultimately yielded the Six Forks Corridor Plan. Parts of it also were moved over to the Walkable Midtown Plan. Both plans were adopted by council, and certainly we're excited about that. This is much more than road widening plan, guys. This is a corridor safety plan. This is a stormwater mitigation plan for that corridor. It is a pedestrian and cycling plan, and it is also a transit incentivizing plan. And at $4.30 a gallon right now, I think looking at transit and buses is going to be a lot more appealing. I think this plan checks many boxes, but my message to you today, although you may not personally drive, cycle, or bike down Six Forks, tens of thousands of people do every day. And after 22 years, we are hoping that this council will pick up the ball and not kick the can down the road. And when it comes time to making those choices for the budget, to please honor this obligation that was made all those years ago to fix this highly traveled corridor. Lastly, I just wanted to reiterate that voters want this project in sorry.
Thank you,
Thank
Tara.
you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Next, we have the report and recommendation of the Planning Commission. Mr. Bowers here, and Roberta Fox from the PC.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Ken Bowers from Planning and Development. We'll start with a review of what's currently coming up on public hearing, and you have 6 items for April 5th. We're not making any recommendations today for more items for April 5th, so I'll go through these. We have a robust report. The Planning Commission was extremely productive at their last meeting, and so we have 7 items to report out, of which 5 are being recommended for a mid-month hearing on April 19th, and the remaining 2 for May 3rd. So let's go through these. The first one is text change TC 421, Transit Street cross sections and green plus frontage. So the primary focus of this is adding 3 busway street cross sections to the UDO, and this is to accommodate, to define what are the appropriate street cross sections for BRT corridors. They also adds a new frontage to the code for the first time since the code was adopted, called Green Plus, and this is an outcome of the New Bern Avenue stationary planning, and particularly a lot of work that was done with the residents of the King Charles neighborhood east of Raleigh Boulevard to settle on an appropriate development option for the historically sort of greener approach to frontage along that portion of New Bern Avenue that still allows for infill and transit supportive development. So Planning Commission recommended approval unanimously, 6-0, and we're recommending a public hearing date of May 3rd. Now that we're back in person, I guess we can take these one by one, or if you wanted me to go through them, we can do with a single motion.
Let's go one by one.
Okay.
So, any questions? Okay, do you have a motion?
1 second, though. I think the presentation is incorrect. This was recommended in the agenda for April 19th.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Do you have a motion?
Move for approval for public hearing April 19th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, next item, Z50. 60.
60.
Thank you.
Thanks. So this next item is a property currently zoned IX with a portion of it zoned I1. It has an existing light industrial user that would like to expand, and they're asking for IX3 with conditions across the entire property. The overlay districts that are on the property would remain. Planning Commission recommends approval 6-0 unanimously, and again, we recommend an April 19th public hearing.
Do we have any questions for staff? Councilmember Fort?
No questions. I was just going to make the motion to set the public hearing on April 19th.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Next, Z78.
Z7821. This is multiple parcels at West Martin Street and Dawson Street. This is you might know this is the Clearscapes property or assemblage that includes some historic structures on Martin Street as well as some parking lots behind there. And this rezoning goes from a combination of DX5 and DX12 to DX20 with conditions. It removes the frontages but substitutes some conditions related to frontages and parking lot or parking deck screening. It also provides for the preservation of the historic buildings on Martin Street along with development to the rear of those buildings. Planning Commission reviewed this and recommended approval 6-0. The Historic Commission also reviewed it and recommended approval on a 10-0 vote. And again, we're recommending an April 19th public hearing.
Any questions? Okay, do we have a motion? Councilmember Fort,
It'd be my motion to set the public hearing on April 19th.
seconded by Councilmember Knight. All in favor? Aye.
So the next item, C7921, this is at Hoke Street and Garner Road in the South Park neighborhood in the light industrial area just to the south. And this is a rezoning that would go from IX to OX with a 4-story height limit, parking limited frontage and conditions. The intended use here is affordable housing, and the applicant is a nonprofit affordable housing developer. Unanimous recommendation for approval. April 19th is the recommended hearing date.
Any questions? Okay, motion,
I move for approval of public hearing April 19th.
seconded by Councilmember Fort. All in favor? Aye. Okay, thank you.
And then the last item with an April 19th recommendation is this collection of lots that's located on East Bloodworth and East Cabarrus Street and Southeast Street. These are city-owned properties, and this was a city-initiated annexation that was before you a few weeks ago to initiate. And it's removing planned development off of these lots and rezoning them to a combination of DX and RX. The RX adjacent to the existing RX zoning and the DX adjacent to the existing DX zoning, both with a 3-story height limit, one with detached frontage to be consistent with the block in which it sits, and the other with an urban limited frontage. Planning Commission recommended approval on a 6-0 vote, and April 19th is the recommended hearing date.
Okay, do we have any questions? Okay, motion,
Move for a public hearing set for April 19th.
seconded by Councilmember Knight. All in favor? Aye. Unanimous, clerk. Next text change.
Great. So the next text change, TC 2021, missing middle 2.0, more homes, more choices. This is a long and extensive text change that has been drafted to meet the council's goal of allowing more housing choice in more places. And it has extensive amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance related to that. And in your agenda, there's a long list in there, but it deals with lot sizes, more provisions for tiny homes, more provisions for ADUs, as well as a special set of regulations for areas with high quality transit service that allows additional intensity, and also provides in certain locations the inclusion of affordable housing units makes you eligible for a bonus. Planning Commission did an extensive review on this. There were some modifications to the ordinance based on the review. I think some good improvements to the ordinance, and staff recommends what the Planning Commission, the changes they recommended. They voted unanimously to recommend approval, and we're recommending an evening hearing for this, so that would be May 3rd.
Okay. Any questions? All right. I do have a question related to tiny homes. It says that they could be used for either single unit or 2-unit duplex living. Would that prohibit tiny home villages?
No. Would it prohibit tiny home villages?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Move to set the public hearing May 3rd.
You were waiting. All right. All in favor? Okay, unanimous, clerk. Thank you.
And then this last item is the only item on the report that did not receive a unanimous vote. This is a rezoning for 3 lots, New Bern Avenue and on Bart Street. This is in the Battery Heights neighborhood, where Pool Road and New Bern Avenue come together. And the request is to go from a combination of RX3 and R10 zoning to RX4 zoning with the urban limited frontage and conditions imposed. The vote was split 4-2 to recommend denial. The votes for denial were related to the development scale with the neighborhood. If you have any more specific questions about the Planning Commission's deliberations, Chair Fox would be happy to answer them. We're recommending a May 3rd public hearing for this.
Do we have any questions? Okay, do we have a motion?
Move for public hearing set for May 3rd.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Unanimous, clerk. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, next we have special items. This is the Greenway Master Plan.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Nickfar with the City of Raleigh Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Department, and I was here with our consulting team, Tool Design, during your work session last month, where we gave a pretty extensive presentation on the Greenway Master Plan project update. So today I have a couple of slides that I could share as a refresher. Ultimately, we're going to be asking for you all to approve the plan today. So I will leave it up to you all whether you would like for me to share those slides or if you just are comfortable going ahead and talking about approval.
Well, I have a question related to Meredith College. I had asked for outreach with them and some conclusions. If somebody could address that, I'm not ready to vote on this until we have an answer on that.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Stephen Bentley with Raleigh Parks. Deputy City Manager Hayward and I and Director Carmona are meeting next week with the President of the University to go over the plan, future studies, and what it means for Meredith College.
Okay, so we're approving a plan then when we don't have concurrence with one of our partners?
We have reached out and tried to address some of the concerns within the plan, specifically about lighting, that any work pertaining to lighting would include a dialogue with Meredith College and other stakeholders.
I think the bigger concern was this being 24/7 on a woman's campus, and there were other alternatives suggested. What is the status of that?
We planned on reviewing some of those options with them next week.
Okay, so how is this addressed in the plan that we are approving?
Primarily, it discusses that any discussion about 24-hour use, we would work with stakeholders, including Meredith, whether it be other universities, schools. So it allows a platform for public dialogue about changes in use.
Okay, and that's in the plan.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's broader language. It basically says that we have a lot of work to do before we bring to you any changes in the Greenway system.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Thank you. Were there any changes made since the last time we saw it? I mean, we offered some feedback. I don't know that all of those required edits, but I assume you've heard that feedback, and if it's not reflected in this revision, then, you know, it'd be taken into consideration in the implementation, but can you respond to that?
Yeah, all the comments that we received during the work session meeting last month were really comments that we had already heard. We'd already been given an update about the current concerns with Meredith, and anything else that we heard during the meeting. They've all been addressed in the plan. It's the same version that was available then.
Okay, may I?
Yes.
I'll just highlight a couple of those that were important to me. One was the frequency of the updates, that I wanted staff to feel the flexibility to do it on an appropriate timeline so that efforts put into planning don't take away from actually building and building out our Greenway system. And then the second one that I remember was emphasizing the need for public-private partnerships in funding our Greenway expansions. So please keep those in the forefront as the plan's implemented. Otherwise, I'm ready to move for approval at the appropriate time.
Councilmember Fort?
Yes, Madam Mayor, to, I guess, kind of echo your comments. I mean, would it hurt us to put this off for 2 weeks to give them time to have that meeting with the president of Meredith to make sure their issues have been addressed before we move to approve? Is my question. I mean, they're large stakeholders, so I would imagine that we could schedule it the next meeting and still have let them have those conversations before we move forward.
Yes, we can put the item off for a couple weeks.
Yeah, we'll bring it back to your first meeting in April, if that's okay.
Okay. I see head nodding. All right, thank you. Next, I hand it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon. We have 3 items today under the manager's report. The first of which is the mobility management implementation study. The city of Raleigh, the town of Cary, Wake County, and Campo have been working together to consider the viability of mobility management as a process for us. So David Eatman from Transportation will present this item.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon. Again, David Eatman, Transportation Department. Today we are going to review mobility management, and today's presentation is just an introduction to what mobility management is. We will be coming back at a later date to discuss maybe next steps, but certainly Raleigh and Go Raleigh are participants in this study. The Capital Area MPO is actually the lead for this project, and Ms. Crystal Odom is actually the project manager, and she is here today and is actually going to run through the presentation for us. So, Crystal? All right, thank you. We'll be here for any questions afterwards.
Good afternoon, all. Madam Chair, council members. Thank you for having me today. Again, I'm Crystal Odom. I'm with the Capital Area MPO. I'm a transportation planner with Campo. I'm also the project administrator for this mobility management implementation study. I'm also the project administrator for our mobility coordination committee. Can you hear me okay?
Could you bring your microphone down a little? I'm having trouble hearing you.
I should have asked that first. Better?
Yes.
Great. Again, I'm Crystal Odom. I'm a transportation planner with the Capital Area MPO. I'm also a project administrator for the Mobility Management Implementation Study, as well as our Mobility Coordination Committee project administrator. And those are both joint projects, partner projects. So this project is our first stage of our first engagement with our key stakeholders. Our goal, as David stated, was just to introduce you to the mobility management implementation study, but also we wanted to make certain that we provide a universal definition for mobility management, and also we wanted to give you the opportunity to provide feedback and input on this study to staff. Many of you may remember that this regional mobility management implementation study was actually born out of our 2018 updated coordinated public transit and human services transportation plan for Wake County and the Raleigh urbanized area. If you remember, this plan is necessary if we want to receive federal 5310 funds. And the plan basically helps coordinate public transit and human service transportation. It identifies the gaps and needs within our region, transportation gaps and needs. So the plan actually had 5 main strategies. One of them was to produce a mobility management project. It was to the plan highlighted the need for additional rural transportation services and additional coordination between the human service agencies and the public transit providers. The Mobility Coordination Committee was also identified as a need, which is, that committee is a structural committee that helps with the bringing together the transportation services for those that need it. Okay, so again, what is mobility management? We wanted to have a universal definition for mobility management so that we're all on the same page. The definitions that we're using actually come from the National Center for Mobility Management, which is federally recognized. Mobility management, in its simplistic form, it connects peoples with disabilities, seniors, low incomes. It actually connects all people to accessible, reliable transportation options. As you can see from this diagram, mobility management is the coordination, cooperation between many agencies, be they public, private. It provides comprehensive and affordable services and makes certain that everyone knows what's available in the region. All mobility management activities have one goal, and that is connecting our customers with the transportation options that are actually available. And mobility management finds the most responsive transportation services to those clients' needs. So mobility managers actually work with all the different partners, and they create a one-stop shop where people can find transportation services that meets their needs. So mobility management collaboration, who benefits from mobility management? It's obvious that our customers, that clients can benefit from mobility management, be they older adults, individuals with disabilities. Again, all people can benefit from mobility management with that one-on-one type of transportation information that's provided to them. But also, it should be noted that agencies that participate in mobility management can also benefit from mobility management. Customers gain a better understanding of the transportation services and how to navigate the system. And of course, it improves the quality of life and gives them greater mobility. For agencies, there's a potential cost savings with improved productivity, and we learn to serve more clients' needs, and we also and provide better programming for them. It helps strengthen, mobility management also helps strengthen relationships with other providers. So this mobility management information study, how is it structured? There's 4 funding partners. We're partnered together with Raleigh, Wake County, the town of Cary, and of course Campo. And we we provided the funding to bring this study to fruition before you, for the region. We have many partners, though. Campo, again, is the administrative agency, and the Mobility Coordination Committee also sits and provides guidance to this study. We also have a technical steering committee. The technical steering committee, as you can see from this slide, is made up of over 20 agencies region-wide. That includes the transportation providers and also the human service agencies, some of the towns. It's a very important regional study, and so everybody's participating. We have at least 2 participants from all of these agencies sit in on some of the workshops. So the mobility management implementation study is broken out into 2 phases. The first phase is foundational and learning. We're doing a lot of information gathering. We're providing, reviewing studies, interviewing stakeholders. We have an initial outreach and engagement. We also have a very important peer review and analysis that looks at at 5 or 6 other agencies that provide mobility management. And then we have implementation planning, a white paper, and an interagency agreement. For this first stage of engagement, we have available materials. That includes, of course, this presentation, but we also have a 2-page flyer that goes into what exactly the mobility management implementation study is, and also defines what mobility management is, again, using that NCM definitions. We also have provided a cover page that, a cover primer page that's a cover that's 10 pages, and it's a primer on exactly what mobility management is. It goes into more detail. So for our next meeting, we'll go into more of the complexities of what mobility management is. We'll be providing you more information on the existing conditions, that peer analysis on the best practices. We'll be sharing ideas on the mobility management, what it might look like in this region. And then we also will look at the benefits of mobility management and offer ideas for a preliminary framework for mobility management in this region. In phase 2 of the mobility management study, it's about the implementation. We will have an implementation strategy, operations and governance planning, public outreach and engagement strategy, and we have final reports and presentations. It's important to know that we'll be coming back to you multiple times, a couple of times, both in phase 1 and phase 2, again, to provide information, seek your input, and really just to prepare you for for a decision that needs to be made that we'll be asking for in the spring and the fall. So just to summarize before I ask this question, I just wanted to kind of reiterate what the goals are of this mobility study. Is to provide expert, concise information on mobility management so that you can make a decision and the stakeholders can make a decision on whether or not agencies should participate in a mobility management regional program. It's to help our goal is to help assist the partners in understanding the best practices and the approach and structure to implementing a program in this region, what it might look like, what the benefits are, what the challenges are, and the impacts to existing services are. We also want to make sure that this study prepares an interagency local agreement that incentivizes partnerships and coordination to build a successful, scalable mobility management program. And then we also want to make sure that we lay a strong foundation for the mobility management program, and that we have an implementation strategy, plan, and schedule that includes outreach and marketing. And with that, I'll ask the question, is there anything else that we've not covered today, just to give you an initial look at mobility management, to help you better understand what mobility management is?
So I have a couple of questions. First, was the Raleigh Transit Authority involved in this?
I'm sorry?
The Raleigh Transit Authority, was a representative involved with this?
Yes, the city of Raleigh and representatives from Go Raleigh are actually sitting on as part of the technical steering committee. And the city of Raleigh is a funding partner.
Yeah, so, but RTA, I'm asking specifically.
So the Raleigh Transit Authority did receive the same presentation. Depending upon what types of mobility management activities may be brought back for implementation, that may or may not require council action. That's really unknown at this point. At a base level, we did want council to at least know that this was happening, and that we were working with all of our peer agencies to develop this kind of enhancement to transportation, a new layer that will really hopefully link a lot of transportation options that currently aren't linked for the public. So again, that was kind of the reason that we're here today, but certainly the Transit Authority has received the information.
Okay, so they have been briefed, and they would be making recommendations then?
That is correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure that was the case. Councilmember Branch, and then Councilmember Ford.
Yes, and this, I think, is more for David. Is this basically looking at taking paratransit program and taking our regular program and connecting them overall? Is this kind of like a umbrella of them both? How does that, I'm trying to understand the connection.
Yeah, so mobility management it takes many forms. It can just be an information resource. So it can be a one-stop shop for everything transportation within a region, everything from human service transportation to private providers to public transit. And then it can get to a different level, more of an operational level, where there is like a layer between a call center and the public, put it that way. So instead of a call center, you really have this layer called mobility management. So it's like an enhanced call center. And so that, depending upon a region's priorities, that layer can do many things. It can actually look for the most cost-effective transportation option. It can look for the quickest and quickest transportation option. So there's different goals that can be associated with how the mobility management is implemented and how it serves the public. I hope that makes sense. But again, some regions look for cost efficiency as the end-all, save-all that they're looking for. But other agencies may not. They want to balance that cost efficiency with, what type of service are we actually providing to the general public. And so, it puts a twist on that, ride time, whatever that may be, to make sure that they are receiving the transportation and the best transportation option available. Again, depending upon the goals that will be developed and will ultimately be relayed to the Transit Authority and to Council.
So the goals have not been developed yet?
That is correct. So
Okay.
we haven't reached that point yet. Again, just introduction at this point, and we will be back in the future with that more detailed information. We'll vet that through the Transit Authority first and be happy to bring that back.
Okay, next we have Councilmember Ford.
Yes, I guess my question is, could you give us a brief description of your public outreach and engagement strategy, especially as it relates to consumers of this product?
Thank you for the question. Our first step in engagement is reaching out to the key stakeholders. We'll be reaching out to the public in the second phase. And again, it's mostly a forward-facing, where we'll be working with individual groups to try to get information in terms of the best way to present mobility management. We're not doing a full-fledged public outreach effort. It's just an opportunity to have a number of key stakeholder groups that we'll be talking to. But the initial stakeholders, we want to get input from the transit providers and those that are the service agencies that are implementing and setting up policies and processes. That's the first step of engagement.
Okay.
So I guess my only concern is that the folks who have disabilities or senior citizens or those folks have the opportunity to engage with you, so whatever is put in place and going to be implemented is going to be user-friendly to those communities. So I guess that's kind of my question about how are you going to capture that information?
What we're doing is we're reaching out to many of the committees as part of this first part of the engagement. The Mobility Coordination Committee has actually human service agencies and people, lay people that use transit users that actually sit on the committee, on the the Community Transportation Subcommittee, and they provide input. again, we'll also be setting up focus groups that have these that have the end users that can participate. We have a number of human service agencies that we've been presenting to, a number of tab boards where these clients actually participate in. So we're actually reaching them through the shaping of this program. Again, this is part of our intake, our informational, what we're trying to do in terms of gathering information to be able to shape the program. So we're listening.
Could we also make sure that we engage the Mayor's Commission on Persons with Disabilities, please?
You want to say it? But we actually have, thank you, David just reminded me, we also have spoken to the Mayor's Commission committee as well. So we're presenting to the various committees and boards that our clients actually participate on in our first engagement strategies.
Excuse me. Allergy season is upon us. We had Councilmember Stewart, then Councilmember Branch, I believe.
Thank you. Mine just kind of follows up on what we've been discussing with folks living with disabilities. I wonder if it would make sense to bring on a member of the Mayor's Committee for Persons with Disabilities onto the Technical Steering Committee. I see you've got a couple other groups that work with folks who would likely use this mobility, and I'm delighted for that, but I feel like they might be missing from this group. So just an idea.
Yes, thank you. And again, we are going to have focus committee groups that actually have additional stakeholders sitting on board to provide input.
Councilmember Branch, then Councilmember Cox.
Sorry. For your focus groups, is there a way we can see the groups that are being represented on the focus groups in case there's some gaps that we may notice?
Yes, we're working with our funding partners and also the TSC and the MCC, and we have a running list, and we've actually been getting the names of who we should present to from the Technical Steering Committee, which is, again, made up of all those agencies, the staff members.
Well, I'm kind of like past the technical part, the community piece. So
Yes.
that part, that's the part I'm looking at. And so if we can just have a way to, and we'll work through David of getting the list to you. We just want to be able to see the list, and that way we can, because there may be, you have your vision, you have your view, but we're walking these streets every day too. And there may be a gap that we may notice that you may not see.
Right, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, Councilmember Cox.
A situation was brought to my attention recently by a resident in North Raleigh that, as you know, throughout the city we have these curb cuts for making wheelchairs accessible so that they don't have to go over the curb. And on Leadmine Road, some of those curb cuts have been replaced. And they're now, I mean, there's still ramps, but they're very narrow and channelized, and they've got curbs on either side of the ramps. And I've sent some photographs to the city manager to illustrate what these look like. And I just want to be sure that we engage with the transportation department as well, because obviously people will go to various corners in the city in order to get a bus. And I want to be sure that we're not doing something to inadvertently create inaccessibility by replacing these curb cuts. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Okay.
Thank you. So the next item is also David Eatman's. It is the Wake BRT study update for our corridors, and David Eatman from Transportation Services will provide an update on that work.
All right, thank you. Again, as the manager stated, we'll be providing an update on the BRT program, specifically talking about the southern and western corridors. But first, a quick recap of where we are. The New Bern Avenue corridor is actually a little bit beyond 90% design. And if all goes well, we're looking at construction starting later this year with service as early as 2024. Our southern corridor It's in early design with 5%, and we have final design in 2024. But that's why we're here today. We're going to be talking about the southern and the western corridor and really thinking about final design for both of those corridors. The western corridor is at 10% design, and again, it says 2024, but let's not think about that quite yet. And then the northern corridor, we are looking at the new MIS, which has kicked off. So that's the major investment study, really looking at BRT options between downtown and North Raleigh, Midtown, as well as Triangle Town Center. So just some recent council updates. The first one was New Bern Avenue. That does progress or is progressing nicely. We are doing corridor outreach, that is continuing, as well as FTA coordination, and we hope to have our full funding grant agreement sometime early summer at the latest, we hope. The northern corridor, just talked about the MIS there, so that's just kicking off now. And then we're focusing today's presentation really, again, on the southern and western corridors. The second bullet there is really the most important, and really how we will work with those corridors to get those into a CIG Small Starts Ratings application, or capital investment grant. So a little bit of a recap of the western corridor. So it is in early design phase. It's a 12-mile corridor, and it does have 20 proposed stations. Our New Bern Avenue, as well as the southern corridor, both of those corridors are approximately 5 miles. So western is a very long corridor. Certainly it's in project development, and again, just summarizing with the timeline bullets where we are. And as you can see there, we're kind of looking for what will be the final design date for that corridor. Some of the activities along the western corridor currently. So we have a number of projects that are intersecting the western corridor. Most notably some NCDOT grade separation projects, Pullen Bridge replacement, Avent Ferry pedestrian tunnel, as well as the railroad grade separation at Maynard in Cary. And that's all of those are being conducted by NCDOT. City of Raleigh projects that we're coordinating with the western corridor, certainly the Dix Park master plan, as well as a potential park and ride enhanced transfer point along the corridor near Jones Franklin Road. And then we have the town of Cary, which is embarking upon a new multimodal center downtown, which will act as the termini for our BRT project. And so we must coordinate closely with that project. Southern corridor, again, a shorter corridor, 5 miles, 8 stations. It's also in project development. It's at 5% design, but it's not up to 10% currently. If you notice the dashed line, that is the more complex portion of this corridor, as that's the Wilmington Street extension that is in Raleigh and extends into Garner to Garner Station Boulevard. So some of the things that we think about as we try to prepare a small starts rating. So you may remember from some past presentations that as we look or develop a ratings application, we're really looking to develop that application at a medium rating or better. As you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, project justification is 50%, and generally project justification is things like ridership, land use policy, those types of elements that really help a project score well. And then you have local financial commitment to a project. One of the ways to balance a project against how you will actually rate and whether you can receive a medium is the more local commitment you put into a project, the better your score is. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're maximizing our federal participation in the project for a small starts project, that's somewhere up to 80%. Very rare do you get 80% return on a federal project these days because it's so competitive. But under the small starts program, that is eligible. So again, you have to think about balancing that local financial commitment, developing your budgets, and preparing a ratings application. So thinking about all of those elements currently and some of the complexities with Western that are currently there today, Western is slightly ahead of Southern as far as design, but we would like to move the Southern corridor to a ratings application this year. Due to the shorter length and some of the, I'm not saying that the Southern corridor is not a complex corridor. I think they're all complex, most definitely. But we do feel confident that we can have a strong application by this August, which really defines the cost of that corridor, and we can maximize the knowledge of that costing brings us to maximize our federal participation and have that rated. We need, for some of these intersecting projects on the Western corridor, to develop just a bit more so that we can develop appropriate cost from those other projects that are along the corridor so that we understand exactly what those costs are and can maximize federal participation within the Western corridor. We do feel that that can certainly happen in 23, but again, this would be looking at a Southern application in 22 with a Western application in 23. The good news is that federal funding has received a boost at I would say the discretionary as well as the formula levels through 2026. So now is a good time to get these projects in the pipeline because there is additional funding. I would also say that there's plenty of competition as well nationally, but there is additional funding within those pots through 2026 due to the infrastructure bill. So final requested action. Authorize staff to coordinate with the grants committee. Traditionally, we would go to the grants committee and then to council, but since we don't yet have that budget item and it's very important for us to move forward with planning and development of the corridor and costing before August, we will certainly work with the grants committee and do that formal process as we prepare a small starts ratings application for the Southern corridor in August, if so approved. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Councilmember Cox?
Yeah, it was recently in the news, like within the past day, that President Biden is encouraging cities to spend American recovery dollars faster. Is there opportunity for us to do that with these projects?
I would say that we are going, we will use as much of our existing funding, well, a lot of our existing funding, quite honestly, is going towards operations. And we expect those funds to be needed through FY23 at a minimum. But as far as new funds available, there are a number of programs, formula and discretionary, that are out there, and we are pretty much putting in an application for every one that we are eligible for. Whether that's a low, no grant, or which is an emissions grant, or whether that's some type of infrastructure project. So the short answer is yes. We're going to be certainly trying to tap into those funds wherever possible. Our congressional delegation's actually holding a grants workshop in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be attending that as well. So, but yes, we're very much interested in trying to maximize that potential.
So we can expect back after those presentations that we can hear more about spending those dollars?
Yes, we will be programming those dollars, and they will be spent. They will not go to waste, that's for sure.
Right.
Okay.
Councilmember Fort?
I don't have a question back. Well, I do have a question. Do we need to do a motion for this, or?
Yes, we do, but I have a question. So, where are we with, yes, I learned yesterday that Western was going to be delayed. And where are we with communicating this to RTA? And have they been involved in this process? Because it has implications relating to our future bus program and whatnot. So I just want to understand the timing, where they're plugged in, and whether you're going to bring any other solutions to us. I'm looking for solutions and not just, hey, here's where we are.
And as defining a solution as in trying to escalate the western corridor?
So as not to delay it, but also how we're coordinating future bus routes with that.
So yes, the wake plan does call for a number of activities within that. Some services within the wake plan have been delayed due to just the financial outlook and cost escalation as it relates to capital projects. So that's part of the ongoing wake plan, and certainly that 23 budget is up for adoption through that process through April and May and June.
So Western also, though, my understanding is ridership issues are part of the delay.
We don't think that the Western, as far as ridership projections, is the biggest dilemma for us. We think that we can have a strong application and it will get a medium rating or better. What we don't know is what the cost of that will be and what our local match versus federal participation will be. And so if we give it a little more time to marinate, we think that we can maximize that federal participation to a much greater number. We could go forward with an application now, but we think that we would undershoot our potential our federal ask, as well as that's a risk, because once you ask FTA for funds, and if they fund it, then you're locked in at that amount, even if your project cost doubles.
Oh,
So,
I'm fully familiar with how our
yeah,
FTA works.
So, we want to make sure that we do that in a very deliberate way and move the projects forward. Again, 23 for Western, we're well within the 26 funding cycle, that will have increased funding. It's a good time to be in the program or in the pipeline. Again, I completely understand the concerns, but we feel that, again, putting Southern first, while it's not a uncomplicated project, we feel confident that we can bring forward a much more competitive project, as well as one that can maximize federal participation better in 22 or this year.
Thank you. And has RTA been briefed on this?
So the RTA has not received this particular presentation as of yet. Late last week, we were making sure that all of our stakeholders were, and actually during budget development, making sure that everybody was on board and that we had a good consensus, that everybody was comfortable with our approach. As you can imagine, within the space we're in, the CAMPO executive body, as well as the Go Triangle Board of Trustees, are the ultimate approvers of everything that we do. That's just the way the process was set up. So we do a delicate dance as being the project sponsors for these projects, to try to make sure that all of our stakeholders are informed of major decisions within a similar timeline. That's kind of difficult sometimes to understand. That is really tough, but we do our best, and certainly we want to make sure the RTA stays up to date on all of our efforts and what we've got going.
So when will they be briefed?
We can brief them as early as our committee meetings, which will happen the first week of April.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fort, if you want to make a motion.
Well, in light of what we just heard, I don't know that do we move forward or do we wait until the briefings for RTA and for some additional information as it relates to ridership on the Western Corridor?
That's a good question. Councilmember Knight?
Thank you. I would suggest let's move forward, knowing that that's going to happen very quickly with the competition that we're going to be facing with these grant requests, and getting those moving as quickly as possible to keep this process moving as quickly as possible. Thanks.
Councilmember Melton?
No, I'm ready to move forward, and I'll make the motion if Councilmember Fort doesn't want to.
I mean, I guess my concern is if we make a motion, we move forward, and then we get information later, we're sort of stuck. So the question is, do we wait to get some of this additional information, and also to make sure RTA has been properly advised, since they are our, Transportation Advisory Committee?
What I'm going to suggest is that we move forward, but I would like to say this is a lesson learned to staff. Please make sure that RTA is informed before things come to us, because they provide us with information, but also that's their job first. And I'm a little concerned that this is coming to us first, and I haven't had, or others haven't had time to talk to some of the members about their thoughts and concerns. But I think we are on a timeline here. So if you would like to make a motion, Councilor Fort.
Just one question real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Has an equity lens been placed on all of this as we're looking for it and we're looking to our application?
So the overall plan itself, each implementation phase, especially, so put it this way, the 4 BRT corridors have to go through NEPA. So a major component of NEPA certainly is the equity component, at least as far as the corridor goes itself, and making sure are really balancing those impacts versus what are the improvements that will be made. If there are impacts. Certainly every single element of our bus plan that we implement, we have to do a Title VI analysis as part of that project, and that's required by Federal Transit Administration. Whether it's federal dollars or not that are used, they require us to do that. So I would say that pretty much through our federal processes, that we've always been required to have that. Now, certainly with the City of Raleigh, we have a new equity lens as well, and so we are certainly using that on our bus services, and then we can certainly make sure that we implement that in some form for the capital corridors, although that is a federally prescriptive process. That doesn't mean that we can't layer some additional work into that. So point well taken, and we can see where we can make sure that that's part of the CIG process as well, up above and beyond what is actually required through NEPA.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Fort.
Thank you. My motion to authorize staff to coordinate with the Grants Committee and submit small starts ratings applications for Wake BRT and Southern Corridor during the Federal Transit Administration Capital Investment Grant Program FY 2022 application cycle.
Do we have a second? Councilmember Branch is seconded. Do you have a question? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? I'm not sure. I saw everybody's hand. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was unanimous, Clerk.
And the last item under the manager's report, we have Mark Perlman from Housing and Neighborhoods, who is going to show how we're being a good steward of our affordable housing bond proceeds with Self-Help Ventures Fund.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Mark Perlman. I am the Housing Programs Administrator with Housing and Neighborhoods. Glad to be here to request authorization to enter into an loan agreement with Self-Help Ventures Fund, leveraging our affordable housing bond proceeds. This is a collaboration opportunity that has been a long time in the making, so happy to discuss some history about how we got here, as well as how these funds will be used. So our request is to enter in a loan agreement with Self-Help Ventures Fund to make a commitment to Wake County's Affordable Housing Preservation Fund. This is a fund that is being implemented by Wake County specifically for the acquisition and preservation of existing rental housing, serving households earning 80% of the median income or below, and specifically with a focus on households earning 60% of the median income and below. Self-Help Ventures Fund is a community development finance institution based out of Durham. They're a local shop, and they're also the administrator of Durham's Affordable Housing Fund. They were selected as the administrator of Wake County's fund through a competitive request for proposals process, and the city was a participant in that process. Housing and neighborhood staff sat on the review panel and helped select them as the administrator. Wake County will be contributing $10.5 million to this fund. Self-Help Ventures Fund will be fundraising from banks and philanthropic organizations, other private entities, to fully capitalize the fund at $61.25 million. And one note as well is that Self-Help will be contributing some of their own dollars to this fund as well. The fund is going to be a revolving loan fund that will offer two products. One is a short-term bridge loan for the acquisition of properties to be rehabilitated using low-income housing tax credits. The second is a longer-term acquisition to permanent loan to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. So we're making the distinction between Capital A, affordable housing, rental properties with legally binding affordable covenants, and then those that do not have any sort of legally binding covenants but are nonetheless affordable to low and moderate income households. The way the fund will work, developers will go out into the community, they will identify preservation opportunities, and then they will apply for loans from the fund. Self-Help will underwrite, originate, and service the loans. So by participating in this fund structure, we are able to leverage their underwriting capacity so that we can move at market speed to compete with the many profit-oriented investors who are operating in this space in the market. So this very briefly summarizes our investment: $4 million of 2020 affordable housing bond funds. These come from the bucket that is set aside for the acquisition and preservation of affordable housing near transit. Our funds will only be able to be used for the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing near transit that considers both existing transit infrastructure as well as future infrastructure and BRT corridors. We are entering into this loan agreement to specify the use and reporting requirements of our funds. Wake County is entering into a services contract with Self-Help that does specify underwriting, selection, eligibility criteria. We will have some additional criteria surrounding the use of our funds. And finally, our investment will be structured as a 20-year loan, 0% interest with payment deferred to the end of the term.
Okay.
So that is a very brief presentation. We see this as a very exciting opportunity. Again, I know that this is something that has come to Council's attention before, and with your authorization, we are pleased to be taking this to the next step. I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Okay, who's going to fight to make the motion?
I actually have one question.
Yes.
Can you define near transit?
Currently, it is defined as within a half a mile of a transit stop that is served by 30-minute or better bus service, as well as within a half mile of a proposed BRT stop.
Excellent.
With that, I move for approval.
Who would like to fight to second it? Councilmember Buffkin has seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Great
Thank
job.
you very much.
Great work. Thank you. That concludes my report. You always have one extra item. What happened today?
Not today.
Okay. Next, we'll go to matters scheduled for public hearing. The first item is petition annexation AX 3221, 4100 Auburn Church Road. I will say that no one has signed up in support, no one has signed up in opposition.
Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, Christopher Golden here with Planning and Development. Nice to see everyone here together. So the first annexation you have before you, I'll go to the next slide here real quickly, but it's contiguous with Raleigh's ETJ. The property is zoned industrial or heavy industrial conditional use. It's located at 4100 Auburn Church Boulevard. It's got an approved subdivision plan on it. Water and sewer are to the site, and the petitioner would like to connect to that water and sewer. I will note this is an approved subdivision plan on the site. What we're actually annexing today are these two parcels that you see here, which total 23.13 acres. If annexed today, it will be brought into the boundaries of Council District C, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Does anyone have any questions for staff? Okay, I'm going to open the hearing and close the hearing. Do we have a motion?
Move for approval.
Have a second? Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. All in favor? Aye. Okay, that was unanimous, Clerk.
Thank
Next, we have AX 3321. This is 6501 Town Center Drive.
Correct. Thank you. This is contiguous inside the ETJ as well. Just under 18 acres. It's in a 6,500 block of town center. Its surrounding uses are residential as well, multifamily, and some retail. This property is zoned commercial mixed use, 5-story maximum, parkway frontage, and it has a scenic highway overlay district. The northern portion of the property is bounded by the outer belt line. The petitioner would like to hook up to water and sewer, which comes direct to all sides of the site. They plan on building a multifamily development with 336 units, and if it's annexed into the city today, it will be brought into the boundaries of Council District B. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions on this as well.
Okay, do we have any questions for staff? Okay, I see that Collier Marsh and Caitlin Shelby have signed up in support. There's no opposition. I've opened the hearing. Would you like, okay. Thank you. All right, I'm going to close the hearing then. Do we have a motion? Councilmember Cox.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve.
Seconded by Councilmember Branch. All in favor? Aye. That was unanimous. Clerk, thank you.
Thank you.
The next item, street closing, STC 0821. This is portions of West Lenore Street and West South Street. Michael Birch has signed up in support. There was no one signed up in opposition.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Council. Ann Conlon with Transportation. So this street closure case is for 2 partial pieces of right-of-way. It's a strip of right-of-way along the south side of Lenore Street, west of Dawson Street, and a small portion along South Street, as you can see on this map. Your backup materials describe how the right-of-way was dedicated and came to be. There is an approved site plan for a 20-story mixed-use building on the site, contingent upon the closure. And staff has worked with the applicant and found this to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. And you can see the conditions in the plan for street closures. I am happy to answer any questions you have for staff.
Do you have any questions of staff? Okay, I'm going to open the hearing. Michael, do you have any comments?
No, Madam Mayor. Michael Birch with Longleaf Law Partners. I do just want to thank Paul Callan with Transportation, Brandon Poole with the City Attorney's Office for working with us over the past few months to get to this point. So thank you. We would appreciate the support for the closure.
Okay.
Thanks.
I will then close the hearing. Do we have a motion? Councilmember Fort.
Thank you. I'd like to move that we approve the proposed street closure.
Seconded by Councilmember Branch. All in favor? Aye. Okay. That was unanimous, Clerk. Next, we have rezoning Z6820, Hillsboro Street, Bagwell Avenue.
Good afternoon. For the record, Travis Green, Planning and Development, pinch hitting for Bynum Walter today, so thank you for allowing me to present these public hearing items. First on your agenda is Z6820. This is an item that's been before you a few different times. It's located on the corner of Hillsboro Street and Bagwell, and it's a rezoning of just over an acre of property to CX7 shopfront conditional use, RX3 urban limited conditional use. So as I mentioned, this began in front of you in January. You've heard it a couple of different times. We're back again today. I know that the applicant is here and might like to talk through what has changed since you last discussed this. So what the applicant will likely ask of you today is that this public hearing will be closed. It is still open right now. And then schedule a new public hearing that would allow for revised zoning conditions and a revised request. This is a process that is contained within the UDO, so you can close the public hearing and then essentially conduct another public hearing to hear revised and updated conditions. And the request that we believe the applicant will ask for is a reduction in building height here to go to the 5-story limitation. So here's a graphic of how the site lays out today. And likely what the applicant will request. There are conditions that relate to transition of height, and that was consistent from when you first saw saw this case. Applicant is still requesting to have a condition that does transition the height from north down to south. There is one new condition that has been brought forward today, and that is with respect to access to the property, driveway access. And so applicant would like to explore a condition that would require access from Hillsboro Street and not from Bagwell. And staff has analyzed that request and found it to be inconsistent with a number of different policies in the comprehensive plan. And given this analysis, staff has made the determination that this would be inconsistent with a large portion of the walkability provisions in the comprehensive plan and inconsistent with the plan overall. This is just a high-level summary of what the applicant likely will request if the application is allowed to go through another public hearing again. I mentioned the height step down, and then a limitation on bedrooms that was previously in the case would be removed. And as I mentioned, this would require the closing of a public hearing and opening of another one just because these conditions are less restrictive. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. I know the applicant is here and can also speak on the issue as well.
Travis, first question. I know a new public hearing will require notification. So when can that notification process take place, and what's the earliest we could schedule the public hearing?
So that's a really good question. Generally, what we advise is that if we were to hold a public hearing, it should happen at about 30 days from today. The 2-week turnaround is a little bit tighter for us. What we've heard is that when we send out mailed notice, people don't always receive the mail notifications with adequate notice to get to a public hearing.
Okay, so we would be looking at the second meeting in April.
In April,
then.
yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. The public hearing is still open.
That's correct.
I'm going to ask Mr. Birch if he has any comments.
Good afternoon, Michael Birch, Longleaf Law Partners, here on behalf of the applicant. As Travis mentioned, this has been in front of you a number of times, and we have been kind of continuously working with stakeholders in the area, residents, owners along Bagwell Avenue, members of council, to put together a set of conditions that the neighbors could support. That does include limitations on height, does include a limitation on rent by the room, and it also includes a condition requiring access on Hillsboro Street. We would anticipate access on both Hillsboro and Bagwell, but what this condition does is requires one on Hillsboro, so not all of the traffic would be utilizing Bagwell Avenue, which is a narrow street without sidewalks. Travis mentioned our ask is we have submitted these conditions, signed conditions, so our ask today is that council close the current public hearing and schedule the new public hearing on these conditions that we have already submitted. In terms of timing, I understand the notice issue. I would ask for consideration that this be scheduled for the April 5th public hearing. March does have a 5th Tuesday, so there is a longer period of time between this council meeting and the next. And again, in terms of kind of awareness, public participation, we certainly had that throughout this case, and so I don't think anybody will be surprised as to where we are in the process at this point. So,
Well, if notification isn't received, then we would have to reschedule anyhow.
Yep, understood.
I'm going to say I am concerned about the condition for access on Hillsboro Street. That goes against all NCDOT policies, all of our policies. We're always talking about creating a more pedestrian-friendly, bike-friendly community, and that violates all of those concepts. So I'm going to have a problem with that, just so you know. Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree wholeheartedly. I share that concern. And, more broadly, if we can't put 7-story buildings on a busy transit line, a streetscape that we've invested a ton of money in, then we're going to have requests for these types of buildings in the suburbs where they really don't belong. They don't support public transit. So I'm not happy about the direction we're headed with this case.
It's my motion to close the public hearing and, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I closed the public hearing.
I'm sorry.
But first, before I do, I just want to make sure you heard those concerns, and I also saw people nodding their heads, so that could become an issue for you, okay? On having said that, I will now close the public hearing.
And it's my motion to set another public hearing, but what I want to say also is that I appreciate the hard work of the applicant and the community members because they came to consensus about these conditions. So I think that's important to put on the record as well. So it would be my motion to set a new public hearing on April 5th.
All in favor? Aye. This is unanimous, clerk. Next, we have rezoning Z2121, 8916 Six Forks Road.
Thank you. This is a request for almost 14 acres of land at Six Forks and Strickland for rezoning. This property is located within the Falls Lake watershed and is currently zoned R1. You have seen this item before, so I'll give you an update. And the application is a conditional use case, so there are limitations on the type of use that's allowed here. There are limitations on exterior lighting and then building setback. There are additional conditions about transition yards, specifically to the north and to the east, fencing conditions, limitation on number of units, 200 maximum residential units would be allowed through these conditions. And then some additional conditions about stormwater control and runoff on the property. Then finally, for last conditions about parking, location of parking, entrances to principal buildings, dogway stations, and then traffic impact analysis at time of site plan. So this was before the Planning Commission. They recommended approval 7-0. And this is inconsistent with the future land use map, as we just saw, and then an approval of this item would result in an amendment to the future land use map to something that is moderate scale residential, more in line with the envisioned density. So happy to answer any questions you might have about this. Again, I know the applicant is here and can speak to this item. Public hearing is open right now.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Stewart.
Thank you. I have a couple questions for staff. One, does this rezoning require annexation?
So I believe this property is within the ETJ today,
Okay.
and the property would need to be annexed into the city limits. That's correct.
And so would this property then be able to hook up to water and sewer without annexing?
That's a good question. Typically, the answer to that is no. It would be allowed through an emergency situation. Typically, where you see connections to utilities without annexation could happen on a single-family residential, one-to-one situation, or if there's an emergency that needs to occur. So traditionally what you'll see is an annexation that must occur before utilities are connected.
And then given the Falls watershed rules, if this property were to be annexed, would it be able to connect to water sewer?
The answer to that's yes. The Falls Lake watershed does allow for utility connections. You do have policies, however, that further guide your decision-making related to utility extensions into the watershed, which is different than utility connections.
Okay.
Could you expand on that a little more?
Yes, ma'am. So it's the difference between extending utility service further into the watershed versus having utility service that's available at the property where you could hook into it. So this property is, I won't say surrounded, but there are utilities that exist on the edges of this property that extend further north and to the east.
Okay. Do we have any other questions of Travis? Councilmember Cox.
So I understand around 2011, 2012, the state required Raleigh to adopt rules to protect the watershed and to protect Falls Lake, because Falls Lake was deemed to be a polluted water body.
Councilmember Cox, I'm having trouble hearing you. If you could speak a little closer to the microphone, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So around 2011, 2012, the state passed enabling legislation that requires communities, including Raleigh, to adopt rules to protect the Falls Lake watershed. Can you elaborate on those rules?
So I don't know that I can get into the specifics of the regulations that came from the state. What I can speak to is what's contained within our zoning code, and I'll look to my brethren in Raleigh Water if they'd like to supplement my comments. So what the zoning code says is that there are different, I'll call tiers of development that's allowed based on how stormwater is treated. So if there is no stormwater treatment device in place, or if there is no response to stormwater, then there's a lower threshold on how much impervious surface or built upon area that could be placed on the property. That built upon area percentage can increase depending on how elaborate the stormwater approach might be. So it gets up to a maximum of 29% in this area, 29% maximum built upon area, or 30%, if there is an engineered stormwater solution that's put in place. So there are limitations on how much impervious surface can be placed through our zoning code. And then there's also the requirement for a 40% forestation that must occur on the property as well.
Okay. Can you speak to the either requirement or policy regarding development being limited in terms of density?
Certainly. So there is additional policy guidance that's contained within the Falls Lake watershed area plan, within the comprehensive plan, that states a maximum residential density envisioned would be 4 units to the acre. So this request that's in front of you at 200 total units would be far in excess of that policy.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, the hearing is still open. I see Collier Marsh here. So I'm going to invite the applicant to come up.
Good afternoon, Mayor Baldwin, members of council. I am Collier Marsh with Parker Poe at 301 Fayetteville Street here on behalf of the applicant. To say that this has been a long and challenging rezoning is an understatement. We started out with a project that we thought was an appropriate balance of a number of factors within the Falls watershed. So trying to prioritize setting a strong precedent for stormwater controls and environmental controls. We also tried to accomplish providing a number of housing units at a time when the city has a housing shortage. We worked really hard on that proposal. We worked extensively with neighbors. The outreach here, a lot of times we put up a slide with all the extra meetings we did. We'd put up 3 slides here. We've had numerous neighborhood meetings, on-site meetings, meetings with HOA members, meetings with stakeholders throughout the process, and worked really hard on the project that's in front of the council today, a project that we tried to establish sets a strong environmental precedent. But in some late-breaking developments, we've understood that there are certain policies that provide a substantial challenge to the site, namely that residential density policy. 4 units per acre is what it calls for. We tried to check every other box, but we didn't check that 4 units per acre box. You have a team that's willing to go back to the drawing board on this one, figure out how to make 4 units per acre work, while also making all of the same high-level environmental commitments that were in the project today. So we're prepared to do that. What we would like to do is go back to the Planning Commission to rework this project. As council saw with all of the outreach, we had 14 conditions, finely tailored based on neighborhood feedback to a specific project. Those conditions, frankly, wouldn't work for the low-density residential option. They're too specific to one option. What we'd like to do, go back to Planning Commission, come back with a proposal that checks every single box in that Falls watershed policy. I understand there's concerns about utility connections and how that could impact this development. Now, what we heard from staff and what's in the latest staff report is that those connections are available today. They're at there's water mains at each street frontage of this property. Those connections can be easily made, and So this isn't a situation where utilities would be extended into the watershed. This property is frankly an island of unincorporated Raleigh, but within the ETJ. So that's something that can be done and still maintain consistency with the watershed policies. To the extent that there's concerns about those connections being made in general, those would be made if not rezoned. So in short, we think the most appropriate thing to do would be to give this applicant that has worked extensively and shown a commitment to develop the right way the opportunity to demonstrate we can check every box. So we'd like to go to the Planning Commission to make sure that can happen. I'm happy to answer any questions. Councilmember Cox, sorry, thank you.
Will you be pursuing annexation?
So it can be done in a number of ways. As I understand, based on the annexation petitions that I've filed, that if an annexation petition is denied, the outcome would be that connections could be made, but at twice the cost. We have a pending annexation petition, but if that proves to be a challenge that needs to be addressed, we can reevaluate that, and I think the proper course of action is to let us go back to the Planning Commission and figure out the right way to do it and have those discussions with utility staff to make sure that we're not creating an unanticipated issue.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, I have 6 people signed up to speak in opposition. The request has been made to send this back to Planning Commission. Before we go through the process, is that something that we have consensus on?
Yes.
Councilmember Buffkin?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't concur. I think this case needs to be denied. We've been through a long engagement process. We've gotten tons of emails in the last few days and some complex issues involving the watershed policy, utility connections, water runoff, and density requirements have all been thoroughly reviewed. There's going back to Planning Commission at this stage doesn't require any engagement, and I'm not comfortable with proceeding that way. The experience in the process was my constituents got engaged, they got engaged late, so I think it's just time for a restart on this one. And you want to continue the public hearing, close the public hearing, I'll make that motion. Thank you.
Let me ask you this. Are you amenable to allowing them to come back to apply to restart the process?
Yes, I would. I understand that this applicant is in conversations about potentially marketing the property. So I'd be open to waiving the 2-year rule to allow them to get that started whenever they're ready. Would prefer a restart on this one instead of going back to the Planning Commission at this point.
I have, as I said, 6 people signed up to speak in opposition. You've just heard this request has been made. Can I see show of hands of who has signed up to speak? Are you okay if we close this hearing? You heard the motion that's going to be made. Yes, sir. Can you set the timer, please? 8.
Mayor Baldwin, members of the City Council, my name is Robert Mulder. I live at 3116 Ward Road, Raleigh 27604. At a previous City Council meeting where this rezoning request was discussed, if I remember correctly, Mayor Baldwin said that the information provided by staff was conflicting. In my opinion, this is not the fault of the staff, but rather the statements made in the city planning documents. The problem is that properties like this one under discussion that are located along busy corridors are all treated the same regardless of whether or not there are unique circumstances. In the case of this zoning case, is located in the Falls Lake watershed. The comprehensive plan should be changed so that a property like this one would not check the box for higher densities because it's next to a busy traffic corridor. The current low density zoning of R1 should be maintained since it's in the Falls Lake watershed. It should be made perfectly clear to the development industry that rezoning requests like this one will not be approved. In the comprehensive plan consistency statement dated December 14, 2021, it states that, quote, the Planning Commission determines that the proposed zoning amendment is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan and other adopted plans, inconsistent with the future land map, but the request should be approved. So if the request is inconsistent and the Planning Commission voted to approve it, what were they thinking? ignore the Falls Lake watershed. Many citizens have worked hard for many years to prevent these types of rezonings to protect the water quality in Falls Lake. Approving a request like this would make a mockery of all their efforts. This rezoning request should be denied. There should be no compromise on water quality, period. Utility extensions, once you start them in the watershed, it's Katie bar the door, and as water quality declines, the taxpayers will have to pick up the tab for more sophisticated systems of filtration. So please deny this case. Thank you.
Thank you. You've all heard the rest, what was said. Everybody okay with me closing the hearing? Folks who signed up to speak?
Come on down.
Please come up.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Black. I live at 6310 Terra Verde Drive in District A. I'm here to...
Could you repeat your address, please?
6310 Terra Verde Drive. I'm here today to hope that you guys oppose Z2121, also known as the rezoning here, and I'm going to speak from 3 different perspectives. The first is as an environmental scientist. As all of you are aware, Falls Lake is our drinking water source for the city, but I'm not sure that you're aware how this proposed rezoning could have deep environmental impacts to the natural ecosystems that keep our water safe, from sediment pollution to algae blooms to the impacts to taste and odor, shifts in thermal temperatures, and overdevelopment in this area could have devastating impacts to our water source. I ask, are we willing to risk the future health of our water for more overpriced apartments? The next perspective I will speak from is as a community organizer. I don't know how often you guys interact with working class citizens, but from uptown to downtown, I see people suffering. I've canvassed communities across the area, and one major concern is housing cost. Let me not mix words. Raleigh is in a housing crisis, more specifically, an affordable housing crisis. The working citizens of this beautiful and diverse cities do not want to see $7,000 to $14,000 a month apartments like we've seen in Midtown. As I'm aware, the rezoning in Falls Lake would allow for housing prices at market value, which in the organizing community we like to call inaccessible. I ask, what is the value of our city to out-of-state developers to seek to not only boost their profits, but just for them? The last perspective I will speak from is as a climate organizer and longtime resident of Raleigh and District A. I hope that many of you remember the summer of 2008, and if you don't, allow me to take you back. I was in 8th grade, and I remember the panic and very uncomfortable water rations that occurred because of how low the water levels at Falls Lake had dropped after an unseasonably dry and hot season. As city council and public leaders, you have to know that we are planning for a city that is experiencing a warming climate. That is the reality of the crisis we measure for. There are material ways that this city is already being impacted by the climate crisis, past, present, and future. So the fact that this rezoning is even coming up for reconsideration, that they're even going back to the drawing board, is deeply concerning when we consider the future of our city, our drinking water, and how it will be affected by longer dry spells and droughts. I ask, how far are we willing to go to keep our city safe, healthy, and sustainable? For this reason, I hope you guys deny this rezoning and don't allow them to come back. Thank you.
Okay, would anyone else like to comment before we close the hearing? You already know the outcome. If you're okay with me closing the hearing, anyone else here? Okay, I'm going to close the hearing then. Do you have a motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated March 15, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to deny the rezoning amendment.
Councilmember Cox has seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Clerk, that was unanimous. You also, the applicant has heard that we're amenable to resubmission. and considering that for approval. Thank you. Okay, next we have rezoning Z7721 at 4501 Edwards Mill Road. No one has signed up in opposition on this, and we have two people speaking on behalf of the applicant.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. So this is Z7721 at 4501 Edwards Mill Road. This is a request to rezone just over 3 acres of property from OX7 Urban Limited Conditional Use to CX7 Conditional Use. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan, inconsistent with the future land use map, and Planning Commission recommends approval of this request 9-0. So here are a couple of shots of the site. This is, I should have mentioned, this is the first time you've seen this at public hearing today. So you've got an aerial on the left and a couple of shots from street view on the right. Applicant has offered a number of conditions here. I won't read through all of these. There are prohibitions on uses. There are limitations on hours of operation. There are limitations on drive-through facilities. There's a requirement for a buffer. Some additional language on building height and building facades. And then some limitations on parking and where the parking can be located at the street edge. And then some additional language on structured parking. And I should mention this property has conditional use zoning today. I know that some of those conditions are being folded in or reimagined here, but largely these are brand new conditions for you to review. So what you can expect from an entitlement or a yield potential for this property is an increase in residential density, the number of units going up from 20, and I think that's set by the existing conditions, up to 106 if this rezoning were approved, and the office square footage stays about the same. Retail is increased given that CX zoning district. So I mentioned this is consistent with the comprehensive plan. There are a number of policies, and many of those key policies that are consistent. It is also consistent with one identified Crabtree area plan policy, and then inconsistent with a few policies contained within the comprehensive plan. So there's some mention in the staff report about the consistency with the urban growth or urban form map, I'm sorry. This property currently has a frontage contained on it. The applicant has offered a number of different conditions that try to replicate or emulate a frontage. So staff here has kind of split the baby and said this is partially inconsistent with this map and with the policy guidance. Just that the conditions don't go as far as the policy guidance might drive us. So this is also inconsistent with the future land use map, which designates this property and surrounding properties as appropriate for office and residential mixed use. So what that means is if this request were approved, there would be a change to the future land use map showing this property as community mixed use. So that's it for my structured comments. I will note we did hear from a resident late last week about the notification for this public hearing, and there was, staff found there was an error in an email address contained in the notification. We don't believe that is a legal defect for notification. It was, unfortunately, an incorrect email address for all of y'all, but there still was a correct email address to reach out to staff and a phone number, so I just wanted to daylight that issue for you, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay. Any questions for Travis? David, I can't see. Okay. Councilmember Knight?
Thank you. In the conditions, number 11 says, talking about lighting around, I guess, the parking structure. After the first semicolon, it says direct upward. Explain what that means. Is that inside the parking deck or external, so it would be shining straight up into the sky?
So I have not reviewed the specific language of the condition. I can do that to answer your question. My interpretation, however, is that's internal to the structure, but I can confirm that for you. Okay. And actually, the applicant might want to speak on that as well.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, no questions for staff. So no one has signed up in opposition. Like I said, we do have members here. Chad Essick is here representing the applicant. So I've opened the public hearing.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of City Council. Chad Essick with Pointer Sproul, 301 Fayetteville Street, Suite 1900. I'm here this afternoon on behalf of Highwoods Properties, the owner and developer of the Glen Lake Office Park. Joining me here today is Jeff Smith. He's the Director of Asset Management for Highwoods Properties. Let me just run through real quickly. As you can see from this aerial, this property is located along what we refer to as Old Edwards Mill Road. And its intersection with Park Lake Avenue, generally west of Crabtree Valley Mall. It's within the Glen Lake Office Park, which is an entirely Highwoods owned and operated office park that was rezoned in 2006 to accommodate that development. Just to the north and east is the Martinique condominium community. To the north across Edwards Mill Road is Camden Manor Creek Apartment. And then to the west across Park Lake Avenue, that is what we refer to as Glen Lake 3. It's showing it as vacant there, but it's currently under development right now. And then further west is Stour Elementary. And then to the south is the remainder of the Glen Lake Office Park, which includes 5 office buildings, all again owned and operated by Highwoods, with a little over 700,000 square feet. So the property, like the majority of Glen Lake, is zoned OX7, urban limited conditional use. Martinique to the north is zoned R10. And then Glen Lake 3, which I mentioned to you just a moment ago, across Park Lake Avenue, that was rezoned to CX12 conditional use in 2018. And then Highwoods amended those conditions. Some of you were on council. And in 2020, we amended those zoning conditions to allow some additional retail to be located along Park Lake Avenue, to provide some greater amenities to the office park users and the nearby residents. So that site's currently under development for about 200,000 square feet of office and 12 to 13,000 square feet of retail. So this triangular site, just over 3 acres, is really the last piece within the Glen Lake office park to be developed. And as it stands now, under the existing zoning, we could develop anywhere from 35 to 50,000 square feet of additional office or multifamily ranging in height from 4 to 6 stories. But in looking at what we believe to be the best use of the site for this remaining parcel, Highwoods would like to do something similar to what they're doing across Glen Lake 3, and that is to provide some amenities for the office park users, given the number of people that work there, as well as the number of people that live in the area. And so they're looking at a restaurant, brewery type concept on this site where folks can walk to, have lunch, have a drink after work, and they don't have to get in their car and go to Crabtree Valley Mall or elsewhere to have those amenities. Of course, the existing OX zoning would not accommodate that kind of standalone use, and so that's really what's driving the request to the CX zoning. As Travis noted, there are a number of zoning conditions, and I won't go through all of them. I will highlight one condition. As part of 2006 rezoning, there was a 75-foot undisturbed buffer that was put in place along the rear property line against the Martinique condominiums. We have carried that condition over, and that buffer has already been planted. It's fully grown. We will be continuing to maintain that. We also, as Travis noted, limited some hours of operation to be consistent with the OX limited use standards for retail and restaurants. We did have some neighborhood meetings and some folks from Martinique did show up, and they were very excited about this project. They were excited about the ability to have a walkable amenity instead of another office building. And so we had some good conversations. They appreciated the zoning conditions that we carried over or implemented. You should have received, council, an email from Glenn Roberts, who is the president of the HOA for Martinique community, expressing his support for the rezoning case. And as staff noted, we did receive a unanimous recommendation from the Planning Commission. So, Councilmember Knight, to answer your question, that condition regarding structured parking, it is verbatim what was recommended from the Urban Design Center. We just cut and pasted it, to be honest. But my understanding that lighting is the interior lighting for that parking deck would be faced up. We don't anticipate actually having any structured parking on this site. We anticipate having a building right there at the intersection to activate the corner and, again, provide a walkable amenity and handling parking through surface parking in the rear and or in a number of other parking decks that Highwoods owns in the immediate area. So, again, happy to answer any questions. We would respectfully ask for council to approve the zoning case today.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Okay. I'm going to close the hearing. I just want to say I'm glad to see Highwoods incorporating this amenity in that area. It's badly needed. There's nothing around there, and no place for people to grab lunch or except in their cafeterias. So this will give people a good place to walk to. And as we talk more about building these walkable communities with retail and mixed use integrated, I think this is a really good project. So thank you. Do we have a motion? Councilmember Knight?
For that, yes, I would like to make a statement as well. Madam Mayor, being my district, I'm also very excited about this project, bringing mixed use to this area that sorely needs it, not only for making the office park more walkable and more connected, but also to the neighborhoods around there. So I think this will be good for this whole area of town. So yeah, I'm excited for this to get going. And with that, Madam Mayor, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated March 15, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action. This approval is also deemed an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Okay. Seconded by Councilmember Buffkin. All in favor? Aye. So that's unanimous, Clerk. Next, we have rezoning Z8621, Rock Drive and Pool Road. No one has signed up in opposition.
Thank you. This is a rezoning Z8621. It's just shy of an acre of land. Request is rezoning from R4 to R6. General use, so there are no zoning conditions here. This has been deemed consistent with the comprehensive plan and future land use map, and Planning Commission recommends 9-0 approval. So here's the site shown in red. You can see that there's a fair amount of low-scale residential around, even some rural residential to the south, and one spot of industrial use in that tow yard directly across the street from the site. So here's a street view of the site and another opposite angle of the site. You see there's nothing there today. So the breakdown between R4 and R6, as you might imagine, is extremely consistent. The one difference here is that you get potentially one more unit in the R6 zoning from 8 to 9. Setbacks are decreased somewhat in R6. So this is shown on the future land use map as low-scale residential, as is much of the surrounding area. There's moderate scale directly south and some further to the west. So as I mentioned, this is consistent with the comprehensive plan, consistent with the future land use map, consistent with a handful of policies, and Planning Commission recommends approval 9-0. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
I have a few questions. My first question is this in the city limits? And if not, how will they connect to water and sewer?
I can check on the answer to both of those for you.
Okay.
Yep.
That's it.
I'll go back and
once
do
I have that answer,
research, and
I
then
can
I'll come
go
back.
from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions, Councilor Branch?
Not at this time.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to open the hearing. We have William Gardner here, speak on behalf of the applicant. I like your hat.
Thank you. Go Sox. Great afternoon, Mayor. Great afternoon, Council. I am actually the applicant. I'm also the developer. We are in the process of annexation. To answer your question, we're just waiting for that to be approved. We're planning to put a townhouse development here. I don't know if you have any other questions for me. I just wanted to make sure I showed my face to you as a home developer, not someone out of state, not someone representing them. So just wanted to make sure, because this is not going to be the last time I'm going to be before you.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Gardner?
One, they're currently widening Pool Road, and for full disclosure, I know exactly where your property is because when I leave my subdivision, I see it every day.
Mm-hmm.
So the widening Pool Road, how will that impact your units, number of units?
Well, we're trying to beat the clock because with the annexation, of course, we have to put things in the ground, and there's a process we have to go through with Duke Energy Progress. So I've been in contact with the project manager to try to stay within the timeline. The main piece was to get rezoned. Once that happened, then some of the other things will fall into place because this was the longest piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
I think I answered your question.
You did. My other question is kind of for staff as it's a process question.
Okay, any, before we get to staff, any other questions for Mr. Gardner? Okay, go Sox.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, sorry about that. So answer your question is yes in the ETJ, so it would need to be annexed, and yes, it looks like there's water directly available.
Right. So will they need annexation before they can move forward?
Well, it's in the ETJ today, so you can act on the zoning. So where it gets complicated is if the property is outside of our ETJ, and we've got a timing issue there.
Okay. All right, I have no more questions.
Okay, all right, I will close the hearing then. Anyone like to make a motion?
There is definitely housing needs in this area. There's a lot of growth. There's a lot of things happening. Like I said, we've already started as a city widening Pool Road. It's good to see a local developer doing work in the city, and I commend you and I appreciate that. And with that, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated March 15th, 2022, containing the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda items under recommended action.
Councilmember Fort was eagerly seconding that down there. I got the signal. All in favor? Aye. Okay, that was unanimous, clerk. Thank you, sir. Okay, next we have text change 1121. This is parking minimums, maximums, and mitigations. We have two people signed up to speak, one in support and one in opposition.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Jason Harden with Planning and Development. I have a couple slides to walk us through the history of this text change and some of the specifics. So a little bit of background about parking regulation. It's really part of understanding the intent of the text change and the potential impacts that it would have. Obviously, parking is something that's regulated pretty specifically by a lot of cities, although in recent years, many cities have begun taking a different approach to how they regulate parking. But traditionally, the assumption was that every trip will be made by driving and that parking is always a good thing and that more parking is better. So that obviously involves a lot of assumptions about the future of transportation that don't necessarily reflect current desires or current investments in transit, walkability, what we see in terms of desire for livability and walkable places. And just in general, a clearer understanding of the benefits and drawbacks of very high levels of parking has begun to emerge, and specifically how it can conflict pretty directly with a lot of other goals that I think cities have begun to find increasingly important, whether that be addressing climate change, given that parking requirements do act as a subsidy for driving, which conflicts with other goals, reducing vehicle miles traveled and associated carbon emissions and other air pollutants. Also plays into the role of housing affordability. Requirements can mean that people must purchase parking spaces or rent parking spaces, whether or not they even own a car or want to have a parking space. Certainly conflict with the increasing use of transit, walkability related considerations about public health, equity between transit users and carless households, again, who don't want to buy parking that they don't consume, and car owners, cost of goods and services. Again, these requirements are in a very invisible way baked into the cost of housing, of commercial space. Almost everything that we buy or live in is affected by these requirements. And then certainly in a more obvious way, creation of walkable areas, and given that a lot of our surface area is occupied by asphalt, stormwater runoff. So a quick review of current minimum regulations, and this is for vehicles. So there already is no vehicle parking required downtown or in the transit overlay district or as a recently near frequent transit. No parking for the first amount of square feet or units in urban frontage districts. And then elsewhere, minimum requirements vary by use, per unit or per square foot. There are also some existing maximums in the code, so downtown or in an urban frontage, no more than 2 spaces per residential unit. And then elsewhere with surface parking, if more than 150% of the minimum is provided, then some form of mitigation must be required. And so this expands upon that existing provision. So there's two main parts to the text change. If you've dived into that agenda materials in the packet, it's quite a long one. A lot of it is more on the clerical side. The word parking is used on dozens of pages in the development code, kind of illustrates how deeply it's embedded in our system of land development and land regulation. So a lot of that is not the substantive elements of the change. There are no changes, I would note, to specific design requirements for when parking is provided, and we fully expect that most developments will continue to provide parking. Most already do provide more parking than the code requires, so that suggests that altering or removing that minimum requirement doesn't change how much a lot of projects will provide. And then where parking is provided, there are requirements that talk about the size of spaces and drive aisles and so on. And I would note that there are separate text changes, one that I think you will see in the relatively near future about the design and screening of parking decks, and another one about electric vehicles. So with respect to minimums, it would again remove vehicle parking minimums. It actually would add parking minimums for bicycle parking for multi-unit housing. So currently that's required in a dormitory, but not any other kind of multi-unit apartment or townhouse development. So it's kind of an illustration again that you get the city that you plan for and regulate for. We've planned and regulated for lots of cars, and to a great extent that describes the environment that we see. This is the opportunity to plan more for other modes of transport. In terms of maximum, this would specify, again, there is that existing maximum, but this would specify maximums for certain uses. No maximum for detached houses or duplexes, those lower density residential uses, not trying to determine the exact number of parking spaces that someone in a detached house might need. Also, more public service or educational uses, no maximums. Generally, otherwise, maximums based on that 150% of the existing minimum as the code currently allows. Office adjusted slightly higher due to a trend towards decreasing amounts of office space per person. So projects that do exceed that maximum, and we would anticipate that some likely will pursue this avenue, can do so under this text change with some mitigation that's included. So downtown or in areas with an urban frontage or a TOD area, the most urban and walkable places, the requirements there would be that any additional spaces be within a parking structure, that 20% of the spaces are available to the general public or shared, and that's mostly about just establishing the infrastructure for them to be used for non-private uses. We found in the past that if that's not put in place at the time of development, it's often hard for that property owner to go back and refit it to be more shared, even if they have additional parking capacity, which is often the case. And then lastly, number 3, and this tracks with the potential of a future text change that does require some level of electric vehicle spaces or readiness. Whatever that text change might require, that additional spaces be provided beyond that, if a project wants to go beyond that maximum. So that's in the more urban locations and districts. In other districts, there would be 2 options. One would be a kind of a more urban option, so providing within a parking structure and providing those electric vehicle ready spaces. The second option would be to bring the building closer to the street, so no parking between the building and the street, additional landscape, detain additional stormwater, and then the electric vehicle readiness requirement as well. So one more technical note I just will address quickly, and this again goes to the fact that parking is pretty deeply embedded in the city's code. So it is used currently with respect to site plan tiering consideration with respect to change of uses. So if there's a change of use that doesn't result in a more intense use, then sometimes there's not a requirement to go to a higher site plan tier, which has more requirements for infrastructure. And so the intent here is not to touch that tiering system, which council just revised recently, not to touch that at all, but because parking is used as a consideration, there did need to be a substitute way of measuring that intensity. So, and that's how it's used right now. It's not a direct measurement. Parking is just used as kind of an estimate or a proxy for the intensity of a project. So this changes that. It removes the parking element and instead measures that intensity a little bit more directly by classifying uses into different groups. And essentially what it does, if a project moves from a lower intensity use to a higher intensity use, then that might move that project to a higher level of site plan tier, depending on how large in terms of square foot the change of use is. Just a note on recent projects, I touched on this already, but generally projects do provide more parking than the code currently requires. So we're not anticipating that this would be something that immediately reduces the level of parking for a lot of projects. There are some residential projects that tend to provide right at that level of the requirement. So there may be a reduction in some of those projects, the level of parking provided. A number of consistent policies, some that explicitly talk about looking at parking requirements, but certainly environmental protection 1.1, which is about carbon emissions, disincentivizing or not incentivizing driving, alternatives to surface parking, creating shared parking, green parking facilities, zoning for housing, again, to the extent that parking is adding to the cost of housing and taking space that would potentially otherwise be used for housing and compact development. So this is the last slide. The Planning Commission reviewed this, recommended approval unanimously, and found a number of findings for supporting that conclusion. I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
So you council members have any questions for staff? Councilmember Buffalo.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Just one question, Mr. Harden. Thanks for that presentation. That was very thorough and helpful. I wonder if you could share with us what I've been told is that the need to obtain financing for projects effectively regulates parking minimums. That you just can't borrow money unless the bank's convinced you got enough parking to support your development. So can you just kind of maybe elaborate on that and share with the council what your knowledge or understanding of the industry is?
I think that's definitely accurate. That's what we understand and hear from when we listen to people involved in those projects, that certain projects and this is many projects of a certain scale, simply won't get financed unless they include fairly large amounts of parking. And then, of course, the builder or developer themselves often may be concerned about having a product that they can market, and the level of parking is part of their calculation as well. And so that's why I think if this is adopted, you would still continue to see a fair amount of parking provided with most projects. I think over time, that lending expectation can and will change. That would depend on partly the norms of a particular city. Is parking required? I think that starts to raise a question, well, if it's not required, do I necessarily need to provide as much? Also looking at the level of transit. So certainly you could take the same lender looking at a project in Raleigh versus a city with high levels of transit. And of course, we're working our way there. And probably they would expect a certain difference in the level of parking provided. But yes, it's completely accurate to say that lenders for any project of any size are going to want to have a fairly large amount of parking included.
I have a question.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Can you speak to the tools we have in place right now that help when there's a conflict between commercial and residential parking, especially when it relates to neighborhoods, when we've got those kind of conflicts?
Right. So the tool that the city has that's been used on a number of locations is the residential parking permit program. And typically that's been used near downtown in more residential areas and near schools and institutions, NC State, some high schools where there have been competing demands for that public space, which of course all parking fundamentally is public space shared by the public, but where there have been concerns about residents of the area being able to obtain parking on the street. The permit program is a way that's been deployed to address that concern. So certainly, if there, as a result of this, are additional areas where there's a higher level of competition for that public space, that's a more targeted tool for addressing that type of concern than this broader current regulation that we have that requires parking everywhere.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to go back to one thing I saw relating to the 20% of parking needed, and could you explain that?
Right, so that would be one of the mitigation requirements for projects that want to exceed the new maximum. And so one of the requirements would be, and that applied to areas within the DX or downtown zoning district or urban frontage zone areas, and that any additional parking beyond that 150% would have to be in the form of a parking structure, which it in those areas likely would be anyway, and that 20% of that additional parking would have to be shared with different uses in the area or available to the general public.
Would that apply to the Dix Park area?
If it has an urban frontage or DX zoning designation, yes.
I'm just thinking in the future when we talk about shared parking, having that be a requirement would be very beneficial. So, okay. Councilmember Knight?
Yeah, as to maximums allowed, is there any limitation once you get to a certain number of parking spaces, you've got to go structured as opposed to surface, trying to restrict the size of surface parking?
Not a specific code regulation either at present or in this text change, but I do think effectively land values and available space start to create that level of transition. I think typically once a project starts to get beyond 4 stories high is when you start to see the shift from surface parking to structured parking.
Of course, I'd like to see that emphasized as much as possible. Yeah, thank you. And last, I look forward to hearing about the pending text change to address the design of parking structures with screening and active use. So looking forward to that. Do you have a time frame on that?
Yeah, staff has been working on that text change, and I believe anticipates putting that out for public review and comment on the text change portal within the upcoming few weeks.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, and thank you for your work on this. I'm going to open the public hearing. We have 2 people here to speak, one in support, one in opposition. In support, Jen Truman.
Jen Truman, 1928 Sierra Drive. I have enough time to talk in my normal voice today. I'm here today to support the text change because Raleigh should end parking minimums. Parking spaces are costly, particularly for single-family homes and duplexes, for homeowners and renters, and for small businesses like the one my firm works with. Parking spaces take up space that's frankly better used by people than cars, and requiring them subsidizes our car dependence. We're consistently reminded that we need radical changes to meet our climate goals. So when people resist change like this as too much, I think it's important to remember that we really do need to change the default. If we want a different and less car-dependent future, then it depends on us, as designers, as citizens, and on you as policymakers to make different and better decisions. Let's not forget, the way parking kills the city is the one thing that Lewis Mumford and Jane Jacobs, classic rivals for anyone that knows urban planning, actually agreed on. Michael Manville, who's a professor at UCLA, wrote in The Atlantic last spring that Lewis Mumford was suspicious of parking. Mumford said, "The right to access every building in a city by private motor car in an age when everyone owns such a vehicle is actually the right to destroy the city." Jane Jacobs disagreed with Mumford all the time, but she said, "Parking lots are border vacuums. They're inactive spaces that deaden everything around them." They published those lines in 1961 in each of their books, when most of United States cities were 10 or 15 years into an experiment called minimum parking requirements. the mandates we're talking about getting rid of today. They force developers to supply those on-site parking to prevent congestion for other things that seem like a good idea at the time. But I'm here to say that you should end that experiment today in Raleigh. We've seen the negative impacts of that experiment. It affects our city by creating pollution, creating sprawl, increasing housing costs. And quite frankly, we want a different future. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, appreciate your comments. Also now, Robert Mulder, speaking in opposition.
Mayor Baldwin, members of City Council, my name is Robert Mulder. I live at 3116 Ward Road, Raleigh 27606. So currently, to me, it doesn't make any sense to eliminate parking requirements on a citywide basis. And I think it's no different than spreading density all over the city instead of focusing it along major transit corridors. Eliminating parking requirements should be done on a targeted and on a case-by-case basis. You should have received a letter from a Mr. Donald Klein. I think it was a 3-page memo where he takes a very pragmatic approach to this, and I recommend reading that letter if you have not already done so. What I worry about is that in the future, I see Raleigh heading down the road towards becoming a Atlanta or Los Angeles Junior. And maybe someday we'll have alternative side of the street parking like New York City if we're not careful. Back in the 90s, when I was on the Planning Commission, there was already discussion about transit-oriented development, and we haven't done doodly. We are making some efforts, but we've done really nothing. And if anyone is thinking that this text change will force people to give up their cars and resort to transit, that's going to take a while. If we had a transit system like Charlotte, then we would have something to talk about. But we do not have an efficient, widespread transit system, and it will be quite a while before we do. Better not put the cart before the horse. So my recommendation is sending this back to the Planning Commission for some additional study and refinement. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I will now close the hearing. Councilmember Cox.
Yes, I just want to say that I really do agree with Bob Mulder, former chair of the Planning Commission. And I also agree that if you go throughout the city, like in any city, there are places where there is too much parking. The parking lots are too big, they're empty, and all they do is absorb heat and reflect it back into the atmosphere. And we need to change that. But I think this sledgehammer approach of just eliminating parking minimums everywhere is not nuanced enough, and it's going to lead to problems in the future with neighborhoods that have problems already providing adequate parking. And there will be, if a developer chooses not to provide the parking, there will be spillover effects of cars impacting people who are already having issues, particularly if there's mixed-use development goes in and the parking isn't provided, and people who are coming out to go to dinner or shop or go to bars will be parking on neighborhood streets. And we've received a lot of emails from people who are concerned about that. So I'm really concerned that this is not nuanced enough, and I would prefer to do as Mr. Mulder's recommending and send this back to the Planning Commission for more refinement, rather than just taking the sledgehammer approach and saying we're going to eliminate minimums everywhere.
Councilmember Melton.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. I was on Twitter the other day and I saw a comment. There was one of the new developments downtown was being discussed, and someone commented, "I'm glad they're building parking, and I hope the city council doesn't take that away at their upcoming meeting." And the reality of it is we've already eliminated parking minimums downtown, but parking is still being constructed. And we had a little discussion about that earlier with Councilmember Buffkin, and that's because, in large part, the market hasn't adjusted to it. And so this will be an incremental change over time. Making this change today will apply incrementally over time, because it will take time for the market to adjust and for the development community to adjust. But eliminating parking minimums doesn't eliminate parking. It eliminates the mandate on how much parking needs to be provided. And for a really long time, we have prioritized spaces for cars over people, and that needs to stop. We are in a housing crisis. Parking minimums drive up the cost of housing. They make it more difficult for our small business owners to operate and start small businesses, and it's bad for the environment. And so at the appropriate time, I will make a motion to approve, and I'm glad we are taking this step. I'm ready to take a sledgehammer, so I'm ready to go.
Mayor Pro Tem Stewart.
So I actually disagree with this being a kind of drastic approach. Other cities have been simply eliminating parking minimums, but as we saw in staff's presentation, this is a more nuanced and comprehensive approach. This is about addressing parking minimums and maximums and mitigating those those who go over maximum requirements. And so one of the simplest things the city can do, as I am kind of a broken record, one of the simplest things we can do to reduce our climate pollution is eliminate parking minimums. This policy solution is listed as one of the lowest hanging fruit on recommended climate policy solutions over and over and over again. Further, it's a solution that costs the taxpayers nothing. Further, reimagining parking is a solution that is listed many times in our own community climate action plan, which we unanimously approved. This text change is thoughtful. It eliminates minimums, it requires more bike parking, and it addresses parking maximums. Big box stores sometimes pave parking lots that will meet the demand of a Black Friday event, and it is no wonder that they sit half empty or more most of the time. This text change says, look, if you're going to pave a massive parking lot, then you need to offset those negative environmental consequences by building more stormwater controls, adding EV spots, and making your parking shared and more pedestrian friendly. And so with that, I would absolutely second Councilmember Melton's motion.
Councilmember Cox.
Just a couple counterpoints. First of all, what we're saying is that the market will, or what I'm hearing is that the market will still require parking. So there's not going to be an elimination of parking. Well, that's probably true. But the problem I have with that is that that really means that we're abdicating our role in terms of planning for the future and planning for development in the city. We're saying it's no longer the city's role, but rather it's the banker's role to plan for parking in the future. And I disagree with that fundamentally. Secondly, this is a sledgehammer approach. It's not a nuanced approach. And it is going to continue to have impact on a variety of neighborhoods that are particularly near mixed-use developments that will no longer be required to provide the parking. And those developers are going to go to the banks and they're going to argue not to put in that parking because it will save them a ton of money.
Councilmember Fort.
I do have one quick question. I know Mayor Pro Tem Stewart asked about the tool of the community permit. And I guess my question is, in some areas where, I know that the cost of the program is $20, but for some families that may be even taxing in this market. Is there like a process to waive the fee, or and Madam City Manager or somebody from Transportation may be able to answer that, but is there like a hardship exception if folks can't afford the $20 parking fee?
We'll have Paul Callum come and address that, Councilmember Fort.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Paul Callum, the Assistant Transportation Director. So currently, we don't have anything in the policy that allows us to not charge the $20. But if that's something council would like us to look at, we can.
I think with some of the challenges that some families are experiencing, if we find some vulnerable communities falling under this policy, that would be something we certainly should take into consideration, because $20 may not sound like a lot to some people, but for some people, $20 is a stretch.
Okay.
I agree with Councilmember Fort's comments, and I guess I'll swing my sledgehammer now. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated March 15th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning text amendment.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? I want to thank staff for working with us on this issue. This is a beginning, and as transit improves, as our downtown grows, we will see the benefits from this. So thank you, everyone, for your work. Okay, next we have text change 1521, towing yards. No one has signed up to speak in opposition.
All right, good afternoon. Keegan McDonald with Planning and Development. I will be presenting on text change TC 1521, towing yards. So this item has appeared before the council before. I'm just going to provide an overview again of the item and also a few options that staff has included in your backup materials. So as a reminder, this is an external text change request to modify allowances and requirements for towing yards. The Planning Commission voted 6-4 at their November 23rd, 2021 meeting to recommend approval of the ordinance. The council considered this item at their February 1st, 2022 meeting and chose to hold the public hearing open for a period of 45 days. Current regulations require special use permit approval from the Board of Adjustment in order to establish a towing yard use. The use is classified as heavy industrial and is only permitted in the heavy industrial zoning district. There's also a 1 mile spacing requirement such that no two tow yards can be closer than that distance apart. There are street and transitional protective yards that are required, and also the site can only be used for the vehicle storage and not for the sale of parts. What is being proposed is to expand the districts where the use is allowed by adding it as a special use in the IX or industrial mixed use district, also eliminating the spacing requirement. Additional use standards were added throughout the review process, including a prohibition on towing yards being located within proximity of a major street, and also limiting vehicular surface area and vehicle storage yards within 150 feet of a residential district or residential use. Included in your materials are 3 different ordinance options. Option 1 is the Planning Commission recommendation, which did not include a use standard related to rail corridors. Option 2 includes a use standard that limits towing yards from locating adjacent to or within 100 feet of a rail corridor. And option 3 is a little bit more targeted and includes a standard that limits towing yards from locating within a transit station area as identified on the comprehensive plan. This map was provided as part of a city manager's update in January, but I just wanted to provide it again to the council for your benefit. We were able to sort of analyze what the effects would be of including a prohibition on sites located within proximity to rail corridors, and you can see how the number of parcels dwindles when a larger and larger buffer is applied to those rail corridors. This image is just taken from our urban form map, which shows where those transit station areas are currently designated. As you can see, they are only along planned BRT routes. They do not account for other potential transit investments like a future S-line corridor, although those could certainly be added to the comprehensive plan once the station areas have been designated through that design process. And these few maps are just really for your reference to show the extent of the current heavy industrial zoning district within the city. Also where there are current existing tow yards, and the extent of the industrial mixed-use zoning district, which is being considered as part of this text change. And lastly, an overlay showing those industrial mixed-use districts, the IH district, and also existing tow facilities. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions on the ordinance options that were presented, and I believe the applicant is signed up to speak as well.
Okay, do we have any questions of staff before I open the public hearing? Councilmember Knight?
I may have missed it. Do you have an overlay of current rail lines or transit lines? Did I miss that?
Yeah, so I believe this image, and I do realize it's kind of split up into 4 identical maps, but those red lines, I believe, are all of the rail corridors that are within our jurisdiction.
So that's rail and proposed transit, is that right?
This map only shows those rail corridors. This map, if you kind of follow the transit station areas, gives you a better sense for those planned BRT routes.
So go back to that previous map. And so the going north through the city, is that where the proposed S line it will be for sure, or we think it will be, or do we not know?
I would need to defer to someone from transportation. I mean, my assumption is it would follow an existing right-of-way path, but I think the complicating factor is that the specific stations have not been selected yet for that S-line corridor.
But we know where we most likely know where the line will go. Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Fort.
The folks who opposed it, the planning commission, do you have a sense of what their opposition was?
Yeah, so there was a variety of feedback we got during the planning commission review. I think there was some general hesitancy to just expand this use generally, just given its nature. There were also concerns related to potential environmental impacts from towing facilities, and then also just whether or not this is an appropriate use in the IX district, and whether or not it should just be confined to the heavy industrial district.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. I'm going to open the hearing then. We have no one speaking in opposition. Here for the applicant is Tom Johnson.
Good afternoon. Tom Johnson of the law firm of Williams Mullen at 301 Fayetteville Street, Suite 1700. I'm the applicant, but I applied on behalf of my client, Raleigh Towing. After the last meeting, we did have discussions. I talked with the city attorney about this, and of course there were some communications with the police department, and you see that in your packet. We're a growing city, and as part of a growing city, what you have to deal with are accidents and the needs that are associated with that. And that's what this is really about, to provide that proximity of towing services to the Raleigh Police Department and to residents. And the limitation is there's just not much IH, as was said before, zoning in which to locate. And the thing is, this is one of those things that I think really fell through the cracks. In the old zoning ordinance, tow yards were allowed in light industrial and heavy industrial. But when the ordinance was changed, light industrial was eliminated, so it left it in heavy industrial. Really, the light industrial district that's available now is the IX district, which is what we're proposing. And there are several restrictions on tow yards, as Mr. McDonald mentioned. The thing that I would mention is this is not inconsistent with uses that are already in IX. Major vehicle repairs already allowed as a permitted use, not even a special use, but as a permitted use in IX. And this is not inconsistent with that. Even what was mentioned at the Planning Commission about environmental issues, those are taken care of otherwise with environmental regulation, but no different than would be the case with a major vehicle repair. I know Councilmember Buffkin has had a concern about the S-line. We're supportive of the option 3, and that is to say that they add the condition that no tow yard can be within any transit station area as designated on the comprehensive plan, and that's fluid. Yes, we have those areas now, but if that changes, this would be subject to that. So as those transit stations are added, as a future of the S-line or anything else is added, that would be included, and we're fine with that. We're agreeable to that, to address that concern as a compromise to reach that. So, again, police chief supports the system as we have it. My client's contracted with the city to provide this service and has to within the city limits. Has been trying to find locations in the city limits. IH is way too limiting. Keep in mind, we've still got to go through the special use permit process. We still have to meet these conditions that are in here. It's not a permitted use, it's a special use. I'm available to answer any questions you may have. My client appreciates his work with the city and wants to continue that. and has had a really good relationship. This is not a tow operator that's towing from private parking lots, which I know there have been concerns about. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about accidents and getting the vehicles moved to let traffic resume and to clean up the site, get the cars towed, or towing as a result of events. And the many events we have in the city where you'll see the notices go up that such and such events happening downtown and you need to move your car, and if you don't, they get towed. That's the type of service that my client provides and wants to provide it conveniently to not only the citizens of the city, but for the Raleigh Police Department for public safety purposes. I'm happy to answer any questions members of council may have, but we do, again, support option 3 that staff has presented, and I do appreciate that modified option coming forward.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Councilmember Knight?
You said your client's supportive of option 3, so I'm just trying to get this correct. So there are no stations right now for the S line, right? So if y'all buy a parcel near the train tracks and that turns out to be in 3 years down the road or 4 years down the road, where
or
they
20.
want to, I'm sorry, where they want to put a what's going to happen then if y'all already own that parcel and are active in that parcel?
It would end up like so many uses in the city. It would be a non-conforming use at that point. But I will tell you, the way development works and the way we're seeing it right now, if that were to happen, that property would be more valuable and the tow yard would move. The property would be sold for some sort of transit-oriented development. It would be too valuable of a property to remain as a tow yard. And the other part of that is just this. Where my client's been looking are light industrial developments, which is perfect. It's where you've got large metal buildings for flex space and that type of thing. And those are the type of areas that they're going to be looking. They're not going to be looking at major intersections where you're going to maybe have a transit station in the future, because it doesn't make sense. That property is too valuable and doesn't make sense to purchase. Even now, where a lot of them are located, it's off the beaten path. And that's where you can expect the market will drive that. But in the future, as the S line comes, if it's 20 years or whenever it is, in 5 years, say there's some transit station areas designated, then those would be avoided because of this condition. That would take care of that. That's my answer to that, and I think it would work very well and would protect that corridor.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, I'm going to close the hearing then. Councilmember Buffkin, and then Cox.
Thank you, Mayor. So I've expressed concerns with this, as you've heard, every time it's been in front of us. I appreciate Mr. Johnson spending a lot of time with me. We've talked frequently over the course of the consideration of this text change. I agree with a lot of the things he said, but I disagree with the end conclusion. For me, this just comes down to a timing problem and a balancing of priorities. If we knew where the S-line stations were going to be, if the station areas had been mapped, I would be the first one to raise my hand and vote for this text change. As it stands, we don't know when they're going to be mapped, and to me that just presents too much risk to the future success of that commuter rail. And I think there's probably some options. I'm aware of some of the ones that, or at least one of the ones that Mr. Johnson's client was looking at. It's in my district. I would have gladly voted for rezoning that to allow for towing, but that's not what we got in front of us. What we have is this citywide change, and I think it's just premature and presents too much risk to the commuter rail. So at the appropriate time, I'll make a motion to deny the requested change.
Councilmember Cox.
And I'm happy to support Mr. Buffkin's, Councilmember Buffkin's motion to deny. We're trying to solve a problem for the Raleigh Police Department. We've not heard from the Raleigh Police Department. We've received no report from the Raleigh Police Department about the needs for towing. Again, it's a sledgehammer approach to rezone the entire city in order to solve a very specific problem. something that, as Councilmember Buffkin pointed out, could be solved by zoning individual parcels in order to be able to provide that service. So I'll be happy to second Councilmember Buffkin's motion.
I do want to make a point about that. You say rezoning. It becomes problematic if
No,
you're saying...
hold on, Mayor.
I'm
Mayor.
sorry.
Excuse me, please let...
This is
I
our
would like to
coun-
respond
hold
to
on.
that
Excuse me,
point, if it's
please
okay.
let the applicant finish.
Mayor, this is council deliberation. It's really inappropriate for him
Councilmember
to jump
Buffkin,
in.
your behavior is inappropriate and violating the code of conduct. You do not do this. You let somebody finish.
No, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the deliberations. That wasn't my point. My point was the rezoning option is difficult. If you get a rezoning letter going out that you're rezoning to heavy industrial, that's going to scare somebody who may have some other property in proximity, and that's the only choice we have. And we're not rezoning anything as part of this. We're just allowing us to have a chance to apply for a special use permit in IX. But rezoning to heavy industrial, which is our only other option, is a scary request to make, although it can be made, but it's just a difficult request.
Councilmember Buffkin, do you have something to say now?
Well, I think my point has been made, but I'll just say again, the parcel that was brought to my attention was surrounded by other industrial uses, and I would have gladly supported that rezoning case. So I think there's options out there that are better, but I won't.
Councilmember Knight.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I guess Councilor Buffkin's making a point, and also to Mr. Councilor Cox's point, I'd like to hear from the Raleigh Police Department as well. And so one recommendation we could do is put this, if Councilor Branch would accept this in his Transportation Committee, to take that back and hear from the parties or the stakeholders, because I don't think we've heard directly from the police department. It seems like there is another way to go about this, or some other options that aren't before us that I would, if Councilor Branch and the mayor would accept putting this in the committee to have more conversation around it.
We have someone from, Madam Mayor, if I may, we have someone from RPD. I think let them speak to it, but I don't really see this as a transit issue. It's a zoning issue.
Councilmember Melton.
A couple things. We had this in committee, and we recommended it out, and then council authorized this, at least the process to start. Now we have it here. If I remember correctly, the conversation we had was the light industrial already allows for things like vehicle sales and storage and stuff like that. If someone from planning wants, if I'm saying anything wrong, someone flag me, but that there are already similar uses allowed in light industrial. But the big concern that when it came to the table was, what about the S-Line commuter rail? And it sounds like after this 45-day break, what staff came back and said is, here are some carved out ways we could address the concern about. So it sounds, uses are already allowed in light industrial that are very similar to a tow yard, like vehicle sales and storage. That seems like a very small concern when it came to the table the first time. The bigger concern was, what if someone buys a property near a commuter rail, future commuter rail station, and then in 20 years we're getting ready to do that, and now we've got a tow yard where we really want to have housing and retail. And so I think part of this addresses that, because it says based on the comprehensive plan. And so though it's still speculative at this point where commuter rail's going to ultimately go, we have an idea, and we could probably work some of that in the comprehensive plan in the near future. And the second piece is, and this is something that I heard Mr. Johnson say, is I think it's probably unlikely that folks, once they know a station's coming in, are going to sit on that very, very valuable piece of land. I know none of us can predict the future, but I just feel like that temperature on this has gotten so high when what we're talking about is allowing a use in light industrial that's already similar to what's used there, and a plan that staff has come up for how we can address the speculative future commuter rail. So I just don't want I don't want this to get so heated. I don't think it needs to. I would support option 3. I know there's been a lot of time spent on this already. It's already been to the Transportation and Transit Committee. We dealt with it there. So I would be fine with option 3.
Okay, we have somebody here from Raleigh Police.
Good evening, Mayor, and Manager, and Council. Scott Osterhout, a Deputy Chief from the Raleigh Police Department. And I will limit my comments to the content of the memo that was included. So we have a towing service contract, and that is limited to tow yards in the city of Raleigh. We refer to them as our rotation wreckers because when there's a crash in the street with traffic being blocked, we call communications on the radio and ask for rotation wrecker. The next one up, it may be a wheel, it may be a list, but the next one up is called, and if they can accommodate us, they respond to the scene. The reason we do this is for speed. We need someone there quickly. The contract requires the record to be there within 30 minutes. It also requires that someone be at the property within 45 minutes after hours if somebody wants to retrieve their belongings from inside their car. And this really comes down to when we have residents or visitors that get in crashes, when they're out and about in the city, we need to clear the roadway pretty quick, but we need to make it convenient for the citizens or for the residents to go and get their belongings and to be able to access towing to get their car out of the road and to get it to wherever it needs to go. So again, most of what I said is in the memo, and I can take comments or questions.
Do we have any questions?
I do, and thank you for being with us. I understand you're here today because last time we talked about this, it was suggested that maybe a better solution would be to allow these tow yards to locate outside the city. So, and I hear your concern, and it sort of has us stuck, I think, on a policy level. For what it's worth, I'm not mad, and I don't think the temperature's gotten too high. I'm coming from a place of yes. I've worked for 6 months trying to figure out how to make this work. But my question is, do you so you're aware of the other private towing that we just changed to allow those folks to locate outside the city? Can you quantify for us what the delay would be if these contract towers were located outside of the city, but within some reasonable radius of the city?
So there's the ordinance that deals with the towing from private property, and then there's the contract here. So, and the ordinance limits the towing companies to a certain distance from their tow yard. They have to be able to respond anywhere in the city within 24 hours, and I would have to defer to the city attorney's office for the specifics of that. I know that is the difference to us. We need to get them out there quick to handle the wreck in the road to get traffic flowing.
Councilmember Knight?
Well, looking at the map, if you look at the one with the 721 parcels left, I think that would basically be option 3 is what I'm thinking. At least the west half of the city is closer outside the city limits than it would be for most inside the city limits. I'm not sure why we have a policy limiting to the city limits. I guess I think it would obviously add a lot more opportunity, a lot more flexibility. I'd say even half of the city is closer to have somebody outside the city limits than inside it. Again, just looking at this map at this level. So I think that's something maybe we could think about, unless there's something I'm missing in terms of why the policy is like it is.
It is, sir. It's all about convenience to the motorist. It is if a resident gets in a wreck, they know that they can go, probably access public transportation to get to the wrecker site, and it is about access for the resident and convenience, a speed to clear up the road. It's been like that since the early '80s. If there was a workaround, I'd be willing to work with whoever to do that. But this is the way it's been. It works for us.
Madam Mayor, thanks. So I think this is a transportation issue, actually, based on that conversation. It has to do with vehicles, and if they're in a crash, for the owners to be able to get to them at convenience. So it's I don't know, maybe there's another better committee, but I would recommend to put this into to the Transportation Committee and work on this issue that we're talking about now, because I think that's the way we deal with these contractual tow yards.
Yes.
So my question is, when you say to the committee, which policy are you asking us to look at? The policy that the RPD has, because if it's a policy the RPD has of the city limits, that's not transportation.
Well, that's also, it's also separate from this case.
And it's separate from this case.
So, if
Whatever committee is most appropriate, I'll leave that to.
Well, that's what I'm asking. What is it, the actual thing? Because we're trying to.
Well, I'm trying to solve the problem of what we're talking about is car crashes and the owners of that car going to pick up their. I mean, that's what the basis of all this is, right? I mean, they're trying to find places there within their contract with the RPD, which is a part of city government, which says it has to be in the city limits.
And the three
why does it have to be in the city limits? Because it's more convenient. Well, I would argue it's not more convenient. And so let's get to the specific solution. And I would say let's look at other options, which is outside the city limits.
So what's interesting is the three solutions that come up, I realize have a heavy impact outside of my district. So I take that and understand. But I also understand we just set a policy of so many miles from a scene for pickup, which put it outside the city limits. Then we changed it to require inside the city limits, if I'm correct, Madam Attorney.
Yeah, I can, if y'all want me to clarify that. This is from towing from private property was the thing that you did a while back, and that has to do with, I mean, I think some of the companies have like a contract with an apartment complex or some shopping center where they go and tow those vehicles. The way that you adopted it is if it is within 15 miles of the location from which the vehicle is towed, if it's within the city. So you've got to be within 15 miles from where your yard is and where you tow if you're within, and 10 miles if it's outside the city. And so I think that if you know where you're going, that's probably easier to administer than if you don't know where you're going, I think is what RPD kind of said, that they may have people that they're not within 10 miles or 15 of anywhere, and so they can't get to the wreck in time, and so they won't know when their time comes up whether or not they'll be able to be within that limit, if that makes any sense.
Councilmember Melton.
Yeah, it's all getting very technical. I'm trying to, for my own purposes, frame the issue. And so the first issue was, do we want to allow tow yards in light industrial? And we had information about how similar use is already allowed there. I'm not talking about people's neighborhoods, I'm not talking about people's backyards. Light industrial. There's already other uses very similar to tow yards presently allowed in light industrial. Then the issue pivoted to, well, what if folks want to put tow yards in places that we want for commuter rail or something, transit in the future? And that's what staff has spent the past however many weeks on, figuring out a way we can carve it out. I think they've presented us with three very reasonable solutions. I think number 3 is probably the most, the strongest. I would support that one. But we've pivoted from let's not do an entire change to zoning for one case to now let's change the entire RPZ policy because of one case. And it's like both of those seem very heavily weighted in the wrong direction. Tow yards are not different than already uses allowed in light industrial, sales and storage of vehicles. It's just a storage of a vehicle that you're not selling. And I think staff's come up with how we address sort of the transit issue. So again, at this point, I think we may just need to vote. I will be voting against denial, and I would support option 3.
Councilmember Fort.
I do agree that we should go ahead and move along with the vote, and then I think we've got reports of council members, and so if folks want to address additional policy issues as it relates to RPD and the city attorney's office and whomever, they can make that request of the city manager during that time, and then we can take those up. So.
If you allow me to do it, but I want to make one point about the outside the city limits part, and there's an impact you don't really think about. As zoning lawyers, we think about it. There's an extraterritorial jurisdiction. So we might say you can go outside the city limits, but you still are subject to Raleigh zoning. Yep. So that further restricts that ability. I mean, you're going to have to be going to Knightdale or Wendell or Cary, or maybe there's some limited areas that are still in Wake County where you could do it. But not likely because a lot of those end up being in watersheds, and that's another issue. So that's the point. It's not necessarily that simple. And I hate that this has become more complicated. I never in my wildest dreams believed it would be this complicated. But I do believe it's a reasonable approach with option 3 because it allows us, that's fluid. If it changes in the comp plan and it's a transit station, I mean, tomorrow, if you decide to go through the process and add more transit station areas, then we're subject to that. And I would say that's a good compromise.
Thank you. I'm going to say this. We're talking about people who have been in accidents. You're already traumatized when that happens. And then all of a sudden you have to drive to Nightdale to go get your car. That seems unreasonable to me. I think what the police trying to do is keep things close, make it convenient for the motorist, but also be able to act quickly to clean an accident scene and ensure that we can start allowing traffic through again. So for that case, I am going to say that I think Councilor Melton has presented a reasonable argument in support of option 3. Yes.
I was not meaning to say either or, but I don't know why we cannot allow within a certain amount of distance from the city limits. So I'm not saying either or. I would argue that half the city, almost half the city now, is going to have to go farther than they would if you have an accident in about half the city. You're going to have to go farther than you would if you could go within 2 to 3 miles from outside the city limits. I mean, west of Capitol, there's you can't be there. So, you know, yes, if you're in the middle, you can go to the east, but most likely if you're on the western third, you're going to go farther than you would if you could go outside the city limits. So,
Councilmember Knight, I think what Councilor Fort has suggested is during council concerns, if somebody wants to bring up looking at the police policy, that we bring it up there.
Well, could I just weigh in on that point? So if we pass this, there's no need to change the RPD policy. That was the whole point of raising the question during the process. And as far as our options, I think the best option here is to deny this. Of the other options that are available, I think the quarter-mile buffer is the best one. I think the station area planning is going to be about a quarter mile. So that's the best protection. And I think there's just a lot of risk in waiting for the mapping of the station areas and what's going to happen in the interim. I've got my doubts that the market is going to drive the change in use, because once those people have tow yards, one, they're not going to want to move, and two, they're now in a very limited number of parcels that allow tow yards, and they're in a really great location. So I'm not sure it's going to play out exactly the way we've been told, but I'm also not willing to take the risk that it will or won't. So I still think denial is our best option.
Okay, the hearing is still open. Not sure if there's anything else you would like to say.
All I'm going to say is this: if it's not going to pass, you know, option 3, then we'll accept the quarter mile from rail corridors. I mean, you know, we're really in a tough spot here. It at least gives more options than are available now. So I don't want to see it defeated. Disagree with the policy concerns about it. And Patrick, we talked about it. I mean, we can agree to disagree. Had very good conversations about it. But if it's not having it versus at least having it in some limited way, I'd go with that. But I still think option 3 is the best in my perception.
Okay, I will close the hearing.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated March 15, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to deny the zoning text amendment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's 4. 4 opposed, so we're tied. Right, I'm going to then ask about making a motion for option 2, which would get that a quarter of a mile away from any rail stations. And we'll see if that brings a solution.
I can make a motion for option 3 and see if how that goes.
Okay, go.
But then if that doesn't work, do we do options? Like what?
Go.
Do I have the option? All right, then.
Mayor, Mr. Melton, could I
go ahead.
suggest, so I'm confused about what's in our agenda materials. It looks like the ordinance on option 2 has 100 feet. What I would be, what I'm willing to support now would be that quarter-mile buffer. Am I reading this wrong?
No, you're not reading it wrong. We included option 2 with the 100-foot buffer because that's what we have for buffer from major streets, but any distance could be added and we could very easily make that change.
Okay, and we can do that here at the table, motion.
I would defer to the city attorney, but I believe so.
Yes, you can. I just want to make sure that we do it right. So,
Okay.
Would this not have come up 10 minutes ago?
this says the towing yard shall not be located on a site with frontage along a rail corridor or a site within 100 feet of a rail corridor. So you would propose to change the 100 feet of a rail corridor to a quarter of a mile from a rail corridor?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Hold on one second. Okay, and so the other sections don't change, correct?
That's correct. It's just that section and that buffer distance, which we could very easily update.
So this would be option 2, which subsection E would now read, the towing yard shall not be located on a site with frontage along a rail corridor or on a site within 1/4 mile of a rail corridor, or 1,320 feet.
I think a quarter of a mile is sufficient.
Yeah, I got a message from Travis. Yes, quarter mile.
Okay, clerk, do you have that language? And Councilor Buffkin, do you want to make that motion?
I'll give it a shot. You still want me to read the consistency statement, right?
Yes, and just say option 2 as revised by the city attorney.
Okay, I can do that. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated March 15, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning text amendment as option 2 included in our agenda, amended as just described by the city attorney.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
Councilmember Cox in opposition. Thank you, everyone. That was 38 minutes of fun. Okay, next we have the, next, I just want a break, but we could do that virtually, can't do it anymore. Okay, next we have the report and recommendation of the Economic Development and Innovation Committee.
No report today. We have 2 items pending, social districts and the ACU text change. Our next meeting is next Tuesday, March 22nd at 1:30. It's virtual for the last time. So we'll take up one or both of those issues. I'm actually thinking that the ACU issue may be better to take up when we're back in person because it's heavy. So we may just address social districts on the 22nd, but I'll get up with Mr. Raleigh about that.
Okay, thank you. Growth and natural resources.
No report and no items pending, so we will not have a meeting in March, and I know my committee members are real upset about that.
Safe, Vibrant, and Healthy Community Committee. Our meeting is going to be canceled. We had originally scheduled a meeting and had asked Wake County staff to attend on the issue of homelessness. They have asked to meet with our staff first and handle some of these issues on the staff level before coming back to us. So I'm canceling our meeting. Next, we have the Transportation and Transit Committee.
We will meet March 24th virtually at our scheduled time.
Okay, and what is on your agenda?
Expansion of sidewalks with.
Okay, thank you for the record. All right, next we have the report from Mayor and City Council. I believe we start with you, Councilor Fort.
Well, I have two items, and I guess these are both for the city manager. The first is I must admit I'm a little confused with the dashboard for our boards and commissions. I was thinking it was going to be applicant information and all of that included, and I haven't been able to find it. So I guess I just want to know, are we going to put the applicant information in there as well as the membership of the boards and commissions and when everything expires, to make it easier and for the public to be able to, participate in terms of applying for these boards and commissions?
So, very good question. I think our IT staff has made that capability possible. So, Gail, would you like to respond to that? There's your answer.
We have not gone deep into it because we did not know exactly what position the council wanted to take, but Cassidy has been working with the IT staff and trying to figure out the best way to get it all together. So we're moving forward, but just sort of needed a little bit of direction and reaffirmation from the council that that's what you wanted to do.
Well, I'll speak for myself. It'll make it much easier for me to have it in one portal. So I don't know what the other council members think, but
I agree.
I agree. I think that was the whole purpose, was making sure we could go to one place where we would have applicant information as well, so we're not going through piles of printed materials. I think that will make it more efficient. So sooner that can get done, better for all of us.
And our office agrees with that concept 100%, just figuring out how to get it done. We
Okay.
need IT to.
IT is ready, so it should be available very soon.
Okay.
all right, thank you.
And your second item, Councilor Fort?
Came up today, so I guess I just need to know from parking and transportation when we can get a follow-up about the waiver process for the permits, because I don't want that to fall through the cracks and then we end up having a situation where people are being impacted. So whenever staff can bring us something back
Yes.
on that so we can take action, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilmember Branch?
Just one item. Recently, we've had a lot of multifamily housing with fires. If we could get a report from our fire department on any common trends or things that they're seeing, so we can figure out what changes we may need to make with any of our policies to make some of these places safer, it'd be appreciated. That's all I have.
Thank you. We will.
Councilmember Melton?
I have no report. I will just be joining Mayor Pro Tem Stewart in her report.
Councilmember Cox?
Yeah, I would just want to report that there will be a celebration at Brentwood Park on Saturday at 10 a.m. To celebrate the park's new playground and picnic shelter and comfort station. Refreshments will be provided, and the ceremony will be followed by family-friendly activities. So if you're in the area, come on out.
Councilmember Buffkin?
No report today, thank you.
Councilmember Knight?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just want to report that coming up fast tomorrow, I'm having a virtual listening session tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. And this session will focus on the city's parks, greenways, and recreational planning and cultural resources. Glad to have Director Oscar Carmona as the featured speaker. He'll share information about the current park projects and plans for the next parks bond. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Stewart?
I have one item today, and as Councilmember Melton alluded to, we've been working on it together. So one way to address the issue of homelessness is to make sure folks don't lose their home in the first place. For many years, we've had a growing population of individuals who've been evicted, and COVID-19 would have worsened that in many ways as people lost their income. However, governments and nonprofits saw this crisis looming and stepped in with funding and programs to keep people in their homes. One way they did that was by ensuring individuals who were being evicted were represented by a lawyer in court. The City of Durham actually started this type of program pre-pandemic by partnering with a local nonprofit. They saw great success in both preventing evictions and simply affording people more time to find a new housing solution. This allowed the individual to avoid having an eviction on their rental history, which tragically would remain on their renter record for many years, preventing them from finding housing. I think it's worth stating, though, that we are supportive and grateful for the many landlords in our community. They are not the enemy, and without landlords, we have no rental property. Rather, this is an attempt to give folks who are really struggling and down on their luck a fighting chance to keep or find housing. So as we look to the future, I'd like to make sure that our own support for people facing eviction continues in Raleigh. Councilmember Melton and I have been discussing this, and I know other council members have also been interested in this work. We've been discussing it with our city attorney and housing staff. And to that end, I'd like to make a motion asking the city attorney to bring back an option or options at our first May meeting so that we can continue to address this community need.
Seconded. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Great work and much needed. Okay, Councilmember Knight has one
Yeah,
other
I apologize. I forgot to add that the listening session has been advertised on the city website, so you can find the link there, the Zoom link there, as well as my social media as well. Thanks so much.
Okay. First off, I want to thank Senators Blue and Berger and Representatives Bell and Reeves for attending our retreat on March 4th. I thought our city council retreat, actually, we covered a lot of ground, including gun violence. I want to thank Gerald Gibbons and Tony Cope for coming out and talking to us about that plan, as well as the police chief. We talked about affordable housing, transit. We visited our promise-built community and got a tour of the Y and looked at future plans for that community. All told, I think we really made some progress and gave staff some very strong indications of where we wanted to head in the future. And I want to thank everybody for hanging with us, because those were 2 pretty intense days with a lot of information absorbed. And I also want to thank staff for all the work that you did to prepare. And I want to thank our committee for moving this forward, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart, Councilor Fort, and Councilor Knight. So just say good job by all, and it was nice to be together and be able to have conversations and also learn and just have that experience. So thank you. And second, I actually have some really good news. I got a phone call from Congresswoman Deborah Ross. She had asked for money for the strollway to be included in the budget. It didn't look like it was going to go our way, but the Congress approved the budget with funding for the strollway in it. The Senate also approved that, and it is now, if it hasn't already been signed, it will be signed by President Biden today. And so I'm really excited because we've all talked about the potential for the strollway project connecting Chavis Park to Dix Park and having us honor our history. And so I'm thrilled, and I want to thank Congresswoman Ross, but I also want to thank our delegation, our Senate delegation, for moving this forward. All told, Wake County will receive about $10 million in funding for different projects. So that's good news for our region. So thank you, everyone. Yeah, so we can end on the good note. Next, City Clerk. We have appointments.
Yes, we do. And I appreciate the comments about the dashboard and hope to move forward and help you make more appointments.
Okay.
Appearance Commission, you have one alternate vacancy, no nominees. Board of Adjustment, one alternate vacancy, no nominees. Hispanic and Immigrant Affairs Board, you have one vacancy for community category and one vacancy for professional category. No nominees for either of those. Human Relations Commission, one vacancy, no nominees. That gets better. Police Advisory Board, one alternate vacancy. Lewis Hutchinson received 6 votes, so would be appointed. The Raleigh Historic Development Commission, you have 2 vacancies. Rob Allen received 4 votes. Weiss or West Tripp received 5 votes, so would be appointed, leaving 1 vacancy.
Could I just pop in here? We need people who live in the historic districts to serve on the historic district. And the reason why I nominated Rob Allen is because he lives in Boylan Heights, who is going to be losing their representative. So for the future, just so you all understand why that's important, we're trying to reach a requirement.
Excuse me. The next item is Stormwater Management Advisory Commission. You have 2 vacancies. Barrett Jenkins received 6 votes, and Ian McMillan received 1 vote. Lou Ann Phillips received 7 votes. So Barrett Jenkins and Lou Ann Phillips would be appointed, and so you have a full slate there at this time. The last is the Substance Use Advisory Commission, 1 vacancy. DeCorba White received 6 votes, so would be appointed, so you have a full slate there. That's all of the appointments. On nominations, we're still holding and waiting for the county to provide an appointee for the Appearance Commission. And then the last is Human Relations Commission. You have 1 vacancy. The term of Troy Dixon is expiring. He is eligible for reappointment and would like to be considered for reappointment.
Councilmember Fort.
If I may, I'd like to make the motion to reappoint Mr. Dixon, or Attorney Dixon, to the Human Relations Commission.
Seconded by Councilmember Branch. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Clerk?
Okay, one that is not on the agenda is on the Human Relations Commission, the term of Taddy.
It's on the agenda. It's on the agenda.
Okay, but what did I do? Skip it?
Yeah, it's number 5.
Okay, I'm sorry. I did. On the Human Relations Commission, the term of Taddy, Taddy Patilla has expired, and she is not eligible for reappointment. And due to past practice, you would elevate the longest-serving alternate member and declare a vacancy for an alternate, and that would be elevating Judy Tardif and declare a vacancy for an alternate.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, unanimous. Clerk?
Okay, I think. Okay, we had started the Human Relations Commission. Did we vote on that one? Tory Dixon?
Yes, we
Okay.
did. Passed
All right.
unanimously.
Okay, that's all of the appointments I have.
Okay, next we have recommendation, report and recommendation of the city attorney.
I don't have a report today.
Thank you. Report and recommendation of the city clerk.
Okay, the first item I have are minutes of the March 1 regular session for consideration of approval.
Have a motion?
Move for approval.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. All in favor? Aye. Okay,
Okay, the
No one
next
opposed?
thing I have is a report on matters resolved in closed session. As was indicated, I think you received a memo from the city attorney, which indicates that state law requires a report out of all issues that have been discussed in work session or closed session and have been resolved. So you received a report in your agenda packet, and I would like permission to include that report in in the minutes of the meeting. Robin, did you want to?
Yeah, we don't need a vote on that. We just need to add it to the minutes with the memo.
It's just information.
For
only
information
the-
purposes.
Then I
Okay.
have one more. I'm beginning to look like the city manager here. On March 1, the city council declared a 4,591 square foot permanent slope easement at 3712 Tryon Road as surplus property and authorized advertisement of the opening bid of the Stokely Preserve on behalf of Tryon at Gorman LLC in the amount of $10,100, subject to the upset bid process and reimbursement of advertising costs to the city. The advertisement ran on March 4th edition of the NNO, and at the expiration of the upset bid process, no upset bids were received, so the initial bid of $10,100 from Stokely Reserve on behalf of Tryon at Gorman LLC remains the high bidder. Therefore, staff recommends acceptance of the bid and sale of the slope easement.
Okay. Councilmember Fort? Okay. Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem. All in favor? Aye.
I'm through.
Unanimous,
That's
clerk.
it.
There you go. Sure you don't have anything else? We have no closed session today, so I am going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for being with us.